Clara Whitmore pressed her palm flat against the hot iron door of the stagecoach and forced herself to look. The ranch was gone. Not damaged. Not struggling. Gone scorched black timber and collapsed walls and ash still rising thin as smoke from a cold pipe. The barn was a skeleton. The fence posts stood like headstones. And in the middle of all that ruin stood a man with burns crawling up the left side of his jaw, watching her with eyes that said one thing before his mouth ever opened: leave. She didn't leave. Before we go any further, if this is your first time finding this channel, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a single story. Drop your city in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from because I want to see how far this story travels. Every comment means the world to me. Now let's get back to Clara, because what she did next, nobody in Red Hollow, Texas ever forgot. The stagecoach driver had already set her single leather trunk on the road behind her. She heard him click his tongue at the horses, heard the wheels grind back into motion, heard the whole world she'd come from rolling away at her back. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the burned homestead and on the man standing in the ruin of it, and she reached down and picked up the handle of her trunk with both hands. She started walking toward him. Nathan Cole watched her come and could not make sense of what he was seeing. He had been prepared for a lot of things in his life. He had been prepared for drought. He had been prepared for cattle sickness and hard winters and the particular loneliness that settles into a man who works land alone. He had even prepared himself in the weeks since the fire for the letter he would eventually have to write to the woman in St. Louis, the letter explaining that there was no longer anything here worth coming to. He had not sent that letter. He told himself it was because he hadn't had the time. That was a lie, and somewhere underneath his scorched pride he knew it. But he had not expected her to simply arrive. He had not expected the stagecoach to stop at the end of his destroyed road and let out a woman who looked at his burned land the way most people looked at a sunset, like it held something worth watching. She was not what he had pictured either. Not that he had pictured much. The letters between them had been practical. He'd described the land and what it needed. She'd described what she could offer. Neither of them had spent many words on appearances, because appearances, Clara had written in her second letter, were the first thing people got wrong about a person. She was a large woman, broad-shouldered and solid, with dark hair pinned back beneath a traveling hat that had seen better days. Her dress was plain. Her boots were worn. She walked with the kind of unhurried steadiness that Nathan associated with people who had already survived something hard before they ever arrived at your door. She stopped about 6 feet from him. He saw her take in his face, the burns, the scar tissue pulling at the left corner of his eye. He was used to people flinching. He was used to that half second where a person's expression broke open before they could catch it. Clara Whitmore did not flinch. She looked at him the way she'd looked at the burned homestead, steady and clear and without apology, like she was simply gathering accurate information about the world in front of her. "You're Nathan Cole," she said. "I am." He kept his voice flat. "And you need to turn around. I just watched my ride leave. There'll be another stage through on Thursday. That's 4 days from now. I know when the stage runs, ma'am. I live here." "You live here," she said, and she looked around at the ash and the ruined timber and the single standing wall of what had been his house. "Then I suppose I do too for the time being." Nathan took one step toward her, and even in that one step, there was something controlled and careful, a man who had learned to move slowly so people wouldn't startle at his face. "Miss Whitmore, Clara, whatever you want me to call you." He stopped. He started again. "I should have written. That's on me. I didn't, and I should have, and I'm sorry you made a journey this long to find this." He gestured behind him. "There's nothing here. The house is gone. Most of the livestock is gone. Whatever I had to offer when I wrote that letter, I don't have anymore. That's the plain truth of it." Clara set her trunk down on the road. She folded her hands in front of her. "When did the fire happen?" she asked. He blinked. That was not the response he'd been bracing for. 7 weeks ago. What started it? Lamp knocked over in the barn. Dry summer. It moved fast. Were you inside when it started? A muscle in his jaw tightened. I was in the barn trying to get the horses out. That's how your face? Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet. Just thinking quiet. The kind that meant she was actually listening to what he'd told her, rather than forming her next sentence while he was still speaking. How many horses did you save? She asked. Nathan stared at her. 2. Out of how many? 5. She nodded slowly, like that number meant something to her. You went back in twice, she said. It wasn't a question. How'd you know that? You saved 2. You have burns on your face and your hands. A man with those burns didn't pull 2 horses out in one trip. She met his eyes. You went back in twice for those horses, and the third time the roof came down, or the smoke got you, and that's why there are only 2. Nathan said nothing for a long moment. In 7 weeks, no one had done that math. No one in town had asked how many times. They'd looked at his face, and they'd said, what a shame, and what a terrible accident, and what do you plan to do now? Nathan, and not one of them had understood what it had cost him to go in a second time, knowing what he knew after the first. You're an unusual woman, he said finally. I've been told that my whole life, Clara said, mostly by people who meant it as an insult. Something shifted in Nathan's face, just slightly, like a door opening a crack before someone thought better of it and caught it from swinging. You still need to go home, he said. I can't ask you to stay here. There's no house. There's barely a roof over the... He stopped. There's a bunkhouse, at the edge of the north field. It didn't burn, but it's no place for a woman to... Is it weatherproof? Clara. Is it weatherproof, Mr. Cole? He looked at her for a long time. The Texas sun was sitting heavy on both of them, the kind of afternoon heat that pressed down on your shoulders like a hand. Behind him the ruins of his house ticked and settled in the dry air. Mostly, he said. Mostly is enough for tonight, she said. Tomorrow we can take stock of what's left and make a plan. There's no plan to make. There's nothing left worth planning around. There's land, Clara said. There's still land, isn't there? The fire didn't take the land. Land without a house and stock and the money to rebuild it is just dirt, ma'am. Then we'll start with the dirt, she said. She picked up her trunk again. Which direction is the bunkhouse? Nathan stood there for a moment. Just stood there, this scarred man in the ruins of everything he'd built, and he watched this woman who had no business being here, who had every right and every reason to be furious with him, pick up her luggage like she was simply moving from one room to the next. Like burned ground was just a room she hadn't been in yet. He pointed north. She walked. He watched her go for a moment, and then for the first time in 7 weeks, something moved in his chest that wasn't grief. He didn't have a name for it yet. He picked up his hat from the fence post where he'd rested it, and he followed her. The bunkhouse was rough. 4 walls, a plank floor, 2 cots with threadbare blankets, and a single narrow window that looked out on the scorched field. Clara set her trunk down beside the better of the 2 cots and stood in the middle of the small room with her hands on her hips and looked around with the expression of a woman doing quiet arithmetic. Have you been sleeping here? She asked. There was nowhere else. She turned to look at him. He was standing in the doorway, half in and half out, like he couldn't quite commit to being in the same room with her. Mr. Cole, she said, I'm not here to judge what happened to you. I'm not here to feel sorry for you either. I'm here because I wrote you a letter, and you wrote me back, and we made an agreement. I take agreements seriously. The agreement was made when I had something to offer. The agreement was made because we both needed something, Clara said. You needed a partner. I needed a fresh start. The fire changed the scale of the problem. It didn't change the problem itself. Nathan leaned his shoulder against the door frame. You always talk like this. Like what? Like everything's a ledger that just needs the columns added up right. Clara looked at him for a moment. Then something softened in her face that hadn't been there before. No, she said quietly. I don't always talk like this. Sometimes I cry, same as anyone. But I've spent my whole life being told I wasn't worth much, Mr. Cole. That I was too big and too plain and too stubborn and too much of everything that wasn't what people wanted. And at some point you stop waiting for someone to tell you you're worth something, and you just decide it yourself. She paused. I didn't come here to be rescued. I came here to build something. So yes, I suppose I do talk like a ledger, when the ledger is the only honest thing in the room. Nathan Cole looked at his boots for a moment. I'll get you water for washing up, he said. There's jerky in the saddlebag by the door. It ain't much of a supper. It's enough, Clara said. He nodded once and turned to go, and then he stopped without turning back around. I'm glad you didn't flinch, he said. When you looked at my face, most people... He stopped. Never mind. I know what most people do, Clara said. I've been looked at my whole life too, Mr. Cole, just for different reasons. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Nathan. You can call me Nathan. All right, she said. Nathan. He walked out into the evening, and she heard his boots on the dry ground, and she stood in the middle of that rough bunkhouse for just a moment, one moment alone, and she closed her eyes and let herself breathe. She had made it. Whatever came next, she had made it here. She did not let herself cry. She'd promised herself she wouldn't not until she'd earned it. But she pressed her hand flat against her chest just for a second, feeling her own heartbeat, and she thought, okay, you're here, now do the work. Then she opened her eyes, opened her trunk, and started unpacking. Over the next 2 days, Clara learned the real shape of what had been lost. Nathan walked her through it without drama, which she appreciated. He was not a man who performed his grief. He showed it in the way he paused at the edge of the burned barn, or the way his hand stilled for just a moment before he named what used to stand in a particular spot. He had built this ranch from raw ground over 6 years. Every fence post he'd driven himself. Every beam in that house he'd cut and set with a hired hand who'd long since moved on. He'd lost it in 4 hours. Clara walked every acre with him, and she asked questions, and he answered them, and slowly between the questions and the answers, she began to understand not just the land, but the man. He was not defeated because he had lost property. He was defeated because he believed the loss had revealed something true about him, that he was a man the world took things from. That he was a man who couldn't protect what was his. He had lost his wife to fever 3 years earlier, and he had survived that by pouring himself into the land, and then the land had burned, and now there was nowhere left to pour himself into. He didn't say any of this directly, but she heard it. On the 3rd morning, she found him sitting on an upturned crate at the edge of the ruined foundation, staring at the black ground where his house had been. He had a cup of coffee going cold in his hands. He didn't look up when she sat down on a broken beam nearby. What was it like, she asked, before the fire? He was quiet for a moment. It was good, he said finally. It was a good place. Tell me something specific about it. He glanced at her. Humor me, she said. He looked back at the foundation. The kitchen window faced east, he said. In the morning when the sun came up, the whole room went gold. My wife, she used to... He stopped. What was her name? Margaret. The word came out different from everything else he'd said. Softer, like it still had weight. She used to say the kitchen was the best room in the house in the morning, and the worst room in the house by noon, because of the heat. But she was always up before me. I'd come in, and she'd have coffee already made, and she'd be standing in that gold light, and... He stopped again. That's gone now. The window, the room, all of it. Yes, Clara said. She didn't try to soften that. He looked at her sideways. Most people he'd noticed couldn't let a hard thing sit. They had to rush in and cover it with something. Clara didn't do that. She just let the truth of it be there, the same way she'd let the burned ground be burned ground without looking away. You don't try to fix everything, he said. Not everything can be fixed, she said. Margaret can't be fixed. The house the way it was can't be fixed. Some things just are what they are. But the land's still here, and that kitchen window can face east again if we build it that way. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. You've got a plan, he said. It wasn't entirely an accusation. I've always got a plan, she said. Want to hear it? I want to know something first, he said. He set his cold coffee down on the crate beside him and turned to face her more directly. Why are you still here, Clara? And I want the honest answer, not the sensible one. Clara was quiet for a moment, and she let herself actually think about it, rather than reaching for the neat answer she'd given herself on the stagecoach. "Because nobody ever looked at me like I was worth looking at," she said. "And when I walked up to you in all this ruin, you looked at me the same way you'd have looked at anyone, like I was just a person who'd arrived. Not a spectacle, not a disappointment, not a—" She stopped and shook her head. "You were too miserable to perform anything at me," she said. And there was something honest about that. Nathan stared at her. Then slowly, something that might have been the ancestor of a smile moved across his face. "That might be the strangest reason anyone's ever given me for staying." "You asked for honest, not flattering." "Fair enough." She folded her hands in her lap. "Now, do you want to hear the plan or not?" He looked out at the burned ground, at the raw land around it, at the 2 horses in the temporary pen, the sky going wide and blue above all the ruin, the same Texas sky that had been there before the fire and would be there long after both of them were gone. "All right," he said. "Tell me the plan." So she told him. Not everything. Not yet. She didn't tell him about the inheritance, not on that 3rd morning sitting on the bones of his old house. That would come later in its own time, and she would handle it the wrong way, and they would both pay for that, and it would very nearly end what they were beginning to build. But she would understand that later. For now, she told him about the practical things. She told him she had savings. Modest savings, she said, which was an understatement, so vast it could have sheltered cattle, and that she wanted to invest them in the rebuild. She told him she wasn't offering charity. She was offering partnership. Her money, his knowledge, both of their labor. "I don't take charity," Nathan said immediately. "I know that," Clara said. "I'm not offering it. I'm offering a business arrangement between 2 people who each have something the other one needs. You have the land, the skills, and the history with this ground. I have—" She paused. "Resources. Neither of us has enough without the other." He worked his jaw for a moment, that stubborn pride moving through him like weather. She could see it. She waited it out. "I'd want it in writing," he said finally. "Whatever the arrangement is, I'd want it written down and fair." "So would I," Clara said. "That's a good instinct." He looked at her, slightly surprised that she'd agreed to that so easily. People with money, in his experience, didn't usually want their arrangements written down. They preferred the ambiguity. It gave them leverage. "You're different than I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "I thought about it honestly." "Someone who needed rescuing," he said. "That's the arrangement usually, isn't it? Woman comes west, man takes care of her, she keeps his house. I expected someone who needed the protection." "I can protect myself," Clara said. "I've been doing it my whole life." "I can see that." "What I can't do," she said, "is build a ranch alone. I don't have the knowledge, and I don't have the hands, and I've never worked land. That's what I need from you." "What do you need from me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Someone to believe it's still worth building," he said, and his voice was rougher on those words, like they'd scratched something on the way out. Clara looked at him steadily. "I believe that," she said. "I believed it the moment I walked up that road and saw what was left. I saw something worth building on." He picked up his cold coffee, looked at it, set it back down. "All right," he said again, and this time it meant something different. This time it meant yes. They shook hands on it. His hand was scarred, the skin pulled tight across the knuckles of his right hand where the burns had healed badly. She shook it without hesitation, her grip firm and even, and neither of them made anything of it. And that was how it began. The work was brutal in the way that all honest work is brutal, not cruel, just relentless. The Texas summer didn't soften for rebuilding projects. The sun came up early and stayed late and beat down on them without sentiment. Clara had never done physical labor at this scale in her life. She'd worked hard. She'd always worked hard because women who looked like her learned quickly that the only currency nobody could take from them was effort. But this was different. This was timber and nails and hauling water and burning muscles and the particular exhaustion of falling asleep before your head finished reaching the pillow. She did not complain. She'd made a point of not complaining. But on the 4th evening, after a day of clearing burned debris from the house foundation, she sat down on her cot in the bunkhouse and realized she couldn't lift her arms above shoulder height. She sat there for a moment, her hands in her lap, too tired to even unlace her boots. She heard boots on the bunkhouse step. Nathan appeared in the doorway, with a tin cup of something that steamed. He looked at her. "Here," he said. He crossed the room and held out the cup. She took it. It was coffee, strong and black. "Thank you." He looked at her hands. Her palms had blistered early in the week, and the blisters had broken and healed into rough patches. "Let me see." "They're fine." "Clara." She held out her hands. He crouched down in front of her and looked at them, and then he went to the saddlebag hanging on the bunk post and came back with a small tin of salve. He applied it to her palms with the careful focus of a man who understood that hands were a working tool and not a sentiment. She watched him do it. His own scarred hands were surprisingly gentle. "You've done this before," she said. "I've worked my hands raw before, yes. Not what I meant." She watched him smooth the salve across her palm with his thumb. "You take care of things," she said. "Not the way people who like taking care of things do it. The way people do it when it's just how they're made." He didn't look up. "I used to take care of Margaret when she got sick," he said. "She'd never admit she needed it. I had to wait until she was too tired to argue." "That sounds familiar," Clara said. He did look up then. His scarred eye caught the lamplight in a way that would have made some people uncomfortable. Clara held his gaze without looking away. Something passed between them, just a moment, just a flicker, and then he looked back down at her other hand. "You're going to have calluses by the end of the month," he said. "Good," she said. "Then the work will hurt less." He made a sound that might have been a laugh, low and short, almost surprised at itself, like his own body hadn't planned on doing it. He capped the salve tin and stood. "Sleep," he said. "We've got lumber coming in from Harlan's mill tomorrow morning." "I know," she said. "I arranged it." He looked at her. "I rode into town this afternoon while you were working the south fence," she said. "I spoke to Mr. Harlan about the delivery schedule." "You—" He stopped. "You went into town alone." "I'm 31 years old, Nathan. I've been going places alone since I was considerably younger than that." "That's not what I—" He stopped again. He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him deciding how to say the next thing. "People in Red Hollow know about the situation. They're aware the ranch burned. They'll say things." "I'm sure they will," Clara said. "People have been saying things about me my whole life." She met his eyes. "Did anything they say ever turn out to be true?" He looked at her for a moment. Then slowly, almost in spite of himself, "No." "Then let them talk," she said. She pulled her coffee cup back up to her lips. "What did Mr. Harlan say when you asked for credit on the lumber?" Nathan's jaw tightened slightly. "He said he needed to see money first." "What did he say when I walked in and paid a third of the order in advance?" Clara asked. A long beat. "He said the lumber would be there by 7 in the morning," Nathan said. "Good," Clara said. "Then we should sleep." He stood in the lamplight looking at her for a moment that went a beat longer than it needed to, and then he said, "Good night, Clara," and went out the door. Clara looked at the steam rising from her coffee cup. She thought about the way he'd held her hands. She thought about Margaret standing in gold morning light. She thought about the fact that she had crossed half a continent for a man she'd never met to stand in a burned field and choose to stay anyway. And she felt something that she recognized from the book she'd read, but hadn't truly expected to feel something tentative and tender and complicated, like the first green shoot pushing up through scorched ground. She drank her coffee. She unlaced her boots. She lay down on the cot and looked at the bunkhouse ceiling and thought about gold morning light and kitchen windows that faced east. And she let herself imagine just for a moment, just until sleep took her, what it might look like to build that room again. The lumber arrived at 7 as promised. And after that, the days took on a rhythm that was its own kind of grace. They worked from first light until the heat got too brutal around midday. Then they worked again in the late afternoon until dark. Nathan taught her the things she didn't know: how to read the wood for weakness, how to set a fence post so it would hold through a hard winter, how to manage the horses that were left the particular stubbornness of the land, and how to respect it without being broken by it. And Clara taught him things too, though she did it less directly. She was organized in ways that Nathan hadn't been because organization had always been her armor against a world that wanted to dismiss her. She kept accounts. She planned ahead. She noticed the small things, the way a supply ran low before it ran out, the way a tool needed sharpening before it needed replacing, and she managed them quietly without making a production of it. He noticed. He noticed the way she moved through problems, not around them, not over them, but through them, head-on with the steady patience of a woman who had been told no. So many times, she'd stopped waiting for anyone's permission. He noticed the way the people in town slowly, grudgingly shifted their opinions. The first time Clara went to the general store alone, she had walked into the particular silence that falls over a room when someone enters who is being discussed. She'd felt it. She always felt it, that shift in the air, the way conversations sealed themselves off. Mrs. Alcott at the counter had given her a look that was half pity and half something less charitable. A couple of men near the door had exchanged a glance that she understood perfectly. She'd bought what she needed. She'd thanked Mrs. Alcott by name. She'd wished the men near the door a good afternoon. She'd left. And the second time she went, the silence was shorter. And the third time, there was no silence at all. Because the people of Red Hollow, Texas were practical people underneath their suspicions, and practical people noticed results. They noticed that the coal ranch, the burned-out ruin that they'd written off over backroom conversations and coffee cups, was coming back. Slowly, board by board and post by post, and long days of obvious labor, it was coming back. And the woman who had arrived on the stagecoach with one trunk and a worn hat was a part of that. She wasn't a charity case. She wasn't a foolish romantic who'd be on the next stage home. She was working. That meant something in Red Hollow. Nathan saw the shift, and it did something complicated to him. He was glad. Of course he was glad. He wanted the town's respect back, even if he hadn't admitted how much losing it had cost him alongside everything else. But there was a thread of something else underneath the gladness, something that pulled in the wrong direction, because he was beginning to understand that some of what was shifting in people's opinions was not about him at all. It was about Clara, and he was not sure yet what to do with that. One evening in the middle of August, he came in late from the south pasture to find Clara sitting at the small table in the bunkhouse with papers spread out in front of her and a lamp burning low. She was adding figures. She did this regularly. She kept careful records of everything they spent. But tonight, something was different in her posture. Something focused and slightly held. He washed his hands at the basin and sat down across from her. "Problem?" he asked. She looked up. She had a way of measuring a moment before she spoke. Not hesitation, just precision. Like she wanted to say the right thing, rather than just the first thing. "Not a problem," she said. "A decision." "What kind?" She set down her pen. "The kind I should have told you about sooner," she said. "And I apologize for that." He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me now." Clara folded her hands on top of the papers. "The savings I mentioned when I arrived," she said. "I called them modest. They are not modest." Nathan said nothing. "My father's brother, my Uncle Edmund, died 3 years ago. He had no children. He had no wife. He spent 40 years in business, and he was careful, and he was successful." She paused. "He left everything to me. I am his only living relative." Still nothing from Nathan, so she continued. "When I say everything, Nathan, I mean enough to rebuild this ranch 10 times and not notice the cost. I mean enough to buy land. I mean—" She stopped. She watched his face. "I mean a significant amount of money." Nathan sat very still. The lamplight moved between them in the small silence. "How much?" he said. She told him. The number landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Nathan sat back slowly in his chair. Outside. One of the horses shifted in the temporary pen, and the sound of it was very ordinary against the extraordinary weight of what she'd just said. "You've had this," he said, "since before you came west." "Yes." "And you—" He stopped. He looked at the papers, at the careful figures she'd been writing in her neat columns. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid," Clara said. He looked up at her. "Every time in my life that someone found out I had money, Everything changed, she said. They stopped seeing me. They started seeing the money instead. And I wanted— Her voice was steadier than she felt. I wanted to know what it would be like to be chosen for what I was not what I had. I wanted to know what it was like to work beside someone who was working beside me, not beside my inheritance. She held his gaze. I wanted to know if this was real. Nathan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Something she couldn't read cleanly. Is it? He said. Real. I think it is, Clara said. I think what we've been building here is real. But I needed you to know the truth about me. All of it. Because I won't hide things from you. Not anymore. Nathan stood up from the table. He walked to the narrow window and stood with his back to her, looking out at the dark. She let him have the silence. People in town, he said finally without turning around. When the lumber came. When the supplies came. When everything came faster than one man's savings could account for. He paused. They already knew, didn't they? Or they suspected. Some of them probably. And they'll say— He stopped. He knew what they'd say. He'd already heard some of it at the edges of conversations that went quiet when he walked up. Lucky man. Found himself a rich woman to fix his problems. Couldn't do it himself, so he married money. Nathan, Clara said quietly. He didn't turn around. What you have done here in the past 6 weeks, she said. With your hands and your knowledge and your will, no amount of money could have done that. Money bought the lumber. You knew how to use it. Money bought the supplies. You knew what to do with them. I have the resource. You have the skill. One without the other is just potential going nowhere. That's a tidy way to see it, he said, and there was an edge in his voice that she hadn't heard before. I know it doesn't feel tidy, she said. I know it feels like something else right now, but I'm asking you not to let pride make this into something it isn't. He turned around. His face in the lamplight was difficult to read. The scar tissue on the left side flattened some of the expressions she'd been learning to watch for in the rest of his face. But his eyes were readable, and what she saw there was a man doing battle with himself, with the part of him that wanted to stay, and the part of him that believed staying would cost him the last piece of himself he had left. She understood that battle. She'd fought it her whole life. I need some time, he said. I know, she said. I'm not— He stopped. He started again. I'm not walking away, Clara. I want to be clear about that. I'm not walking away from what we're building, but I need to sit with this. All right, she said. He nodded once and took his hat from the hook by the door. He went out into the dark. She sat with the lamplight and the papers and the weight of her own honesty, and she told herself she'd done the right thing, and she made herself believe it, even though believing it was hard, even though she could hear her own heartbeat in the quiet of the bunkhouse, and it was doing something unsteady and afraid. She had never been chosen for herself, not once, not in all her 31 years, and now she had handed the man who was beginning to matter to her the one thing she'd spent her whole life protecting, and she was sitting alone in a bunkhouse in Texas, waiting to find out what he would do with it. She blew out the lamp. She lay down in the dark. And for the first time since she'd arrived at the burned homestead, Clara Whitmore let herself cry. Not for long, just long enough. And then she stopped, and she stared at the dark ceiling, and she thought, whatever he decides, you are still the same person you were an hour ago. You are still enough. You have always been enough. She told herself that until she believed it. And then she closed her eyes, and she slept. Nathan came back before dawn. Clara heard his boots on the bunkhouse step. She'd been awake for an hour, already lying in the dark with her eyes open, listening to the night wind work its way across the open land, and she heard him stop outside the door. Not knock. Not come in. Just stop. She waited. He stood out there for a long time. Long enough that she started to wonder if he was going to turn around and walk back out into the dark without saying anything at all. Long enough that she sat up slowly on the cot and set her feet on the plank floor and pressed her hands flat against her knees and just waited, because she had learned a long time ago that you could not hurry a person through the thing they were working out inside themselves. Then the door opened. Nathan stood in the frame with the first gray edge of morning behind him. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, which he probably hadn't. His hat was in his hand, and his hair was pressed flat on one side from where he'd been lying down somewhere, and his eyes were that particular kind of awake that comes not from rest, but from thinking too hard for too many hours. He looked at her sitting on the cot, and he said, "I owe you an apology." Clara was quiet. "The way I reacted last night," he said. "Walking out like that wasn't fair to you." "You needed time," Clara said. "I knew that when you left." "I needed time," he agreed. "But I also needed to stop being a fool, and that took longer." He came into the room and sat down on the opposite cot, elbows on his knees, hat turning in his hands the way it did when he was working through something. "I've been sitting out in the south pasture most of the night thinking about pride, about how it works, about how it's supposed to keep a man's back straight, and what it actually does when you let it run loose." "What did you figure out?" He looked at her. "That there's a kind of pride that builds things," he said, "and a kind that burns them down. And last night I was about 3 steps away from burning down the best thing that's happened to me since—" He stopped. He looked at his hat. "In a long time." Something in Clara's chest shifted. She kept her face steady. "Nathan, let me finish," he said, not harshly, just like he'd been rehearsing this in the south pasture and didn't want to lose the thread. "What you told me last night, about why you didn't say it sooner, about wanting to know if it was real." He paused. "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years. And my response was to put on my hat and walk out the door, which tells you a great deal about how I handle honesty when it costs me something." "It costs everyone something," Clara said quietly. "It shouldn't have cost you that," he said. "Not last night, not the way it did." He finally stopped turning his hat. He held it still. "I'm not going anywhere, Clara. I want to say that plainly so there's no question. What we're building here, I want to keep building it. And I'm not going to pretend that knowing about the money doesn't sit strange in me, because it does, and I'd rather tell you that honest than act like it doesn't. I'd rather you tell me honest too." "But strange doesn't mean wrong," he said. "And pride that won't let a man accept help from his own partner isn't dignity. It's just stubbornness in a good hat." He put the hat on the cot beside him. "So, here's where I am. I'm grateful you told me. I'm sorry it took me all night and a pasture full of horses to get there. And I'd like to shake your hand again if you'll let me, because I want to start today without anything unsaid between us." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the space between the two cots and held out her hand. He took it. And this time the handshake lasted a little longer than it needed to, and neither of them said anything about that. "All right," Clara said. "We've got posts to set on the north line." "We do," Nathan said. He picked up his hat. "Coffee first." "Obviously," she said. And just like that, not easily, not without cost, but genuinely something between them settled into a new shape. The weeks after that had a different quality to them. Not softer exactly, because the work was still brutal, and the heat was still relentless, and there were still days when everything that could go wrong decided to go wrong before noon. But there was something easier in the space between them, the way a door that had been stuck finally swings right after someone adjusts the hinge. They didn't talk about the money again directly. They didn't need to. The conversation had happened, and it had landed, and they had both survived it, which turned out to be the important thing. Nathan started teaching her to ride. Not because she hadn't asked, because she hadn't wanted to admit how much she wanted to learn, but because one morning he brought the calmer of the 2 remaining horses around to the front and said, "You need to be able to move around this property without depending on me to take you." And that was that. She was not a natural rider. This was something Nathan was patient about in a way that surprised her, because patience was not a quality she'd expected from a man whose default setting was focused and economical with words. But he stood beside the horse and talked her through it without hurrying. Corrected her without making her feel corrected. And when she finally got her seat right on the 3rd afternoon, and the horse moved forward with her, actually in agreement with it, rather than fighting against it, he said, "There you go," in a tone of voice that was so quietly pleased it caught her entirely off guard. She had to look away for a moment. The feeling in her chest was not something she'd had a lot of practice managing. The town was watching all of this. She knew it. Red Hollow was not a large place, and large places couldn't have sustained the volume of observation that small ones could. The women talked over fence lines. The men talked at the feed store. Children reported what they saw to parents who pretended not to care, and then relayed it to neighbors over dinner. Clara was aware of all of it the way you're aware of weather, as a fact of the landscape, rather than something to panic over. She was less prepared for the morning. It arrived at her door directly. She was at the water pump behind the bunkhouse when she heard the sound of a wagon coming up the road. She looked up and saw a woman she recognized from the general store, Mrs. Alcott, who ran it with her husband, who had watched Clara with that particular blend of pity and calculation the first time she'd walked in. Mrs. Alcott was not alone. She had brought a younger woman with her, and between them on the wagon seat, they carried a covered dish, and the particular expression of people who have decided to form an opinion and come deliver it in person. Clara set down the bucket she was carrying and walked around to the front. "Mrs. Alcott," she said. "Miss Whitmore." Mrs. Alcott climbed down from the wagon with the ease of a woman who'd been doing it for 40 years. "Or is it Mrs. Cole? I confess we weren't sure of the formal situation." "Miss Whitmore is fine," Clara said. "We haven't—" She paused. "The circumstances being what they've been, we haven't arranged a formal ceremony yet." "Of course." Mrs. Alcott's eyes moved across the front of the property, the new lumber framing rising at the edge of the foundation, the posts on the north line, the obvious signs of serious sustained work. Something in her expression shifted just slightly. "We brought a meal," she said. "Rebecca here is one of our better cooks, and we thought—" She stopped, shifted again. "We thought it was past time someone brought a meal." Clara looked at the covered dish, then at Mrs. Alcott, then at the younger woman Rebecca, who had the slightly apologetic look of someone who had been recruited for this mission and wasn't entirely sure how she felt about it. "That's very kind," Clara said. "Please come in." The bunkhouse was not built for receiving guests, which she suspected Mrs. Alcott noted and filed away for later. But Clara cleared the table of the account papers, poured water from the pitcher, and sat across from the two women without apology for the roughness of the space, and Mrs. Alcott, to her credit, did not make any comment about it. What she made comments about was everything else. "People have been watching the rebuild," she said, over the kind of polite circling that Clara recognized as the preamble to a real conversation. "It's moving fast." "Nathan knows what he's doing," Clara said. "He does." Mrs. Alcott agreed. "He always did. Before this spring." She wrapped both hands around her water glass. "He had a hard time after Margaret passed. People in town tried to help, but he's not a man who takes help easily." "No," Clara said. "He's not." "The fire made it worse." She paused. "How is he?" And this was the real question. Clara recognized it. The dish had been an excuse. This had been the reason. The woman sitting across from her, for all her starched manner and careful eyes, was asking about a man she'd watched go through 2 years of loss and was genuinely worried about. Clara felt the shape of Red Hollow rearrange itself slightly in her mind, from a place full of people who'd written Nathan off to a place full of people who didn't know how to help him and had been carrying that guilt quietly. "He's better," Clara said. "He's working helps him. He needs the work." "And you?" Mrs. Alcott asked. The question was blunter than Clara expected. "I need the work too," Clara said. A small silence. Then from Mrs. Alcott, something that was either a cough or the beginning of a surprised laugh quickly covered. "I imagine you do," she said. She set down her glass. "Miss Whitmore, I won't pretend we didn't have opinions about the situation when you arrived. This town—" She paused. "Small places can be unkind about things they don't understand. And a mail-order arrangement showing up on top of all that grief with a woman nobody knew." She stopped, started again. "We were wrong to let you walk into that store alone and feel what you felt. That's what I came here to say along with the food." Clara looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate you saying that. Rebecca's mother has a garden that's producing more squash than one family can eat," Mrs. Alcott said, moving briskly back to practical ground, the way people do after they've said something real. "She'd be glad to share some if you'd take it." "Tell her I'd be very grateful," Clara said. When the women left an hour later, Clara stood in the road and watched the wagon go, and felt something ease in her that she hadn't realized was clenched. It wasn't friendship yet. It was something earlier than that, an acknowledgement, a small door opening. But it was real. Nathan came in from the field while she was uncovering the dish. "Was that Mrs. Alcott?" he asked, looking after the departing wagon. "It was," Clara said. "She brought food and an apology." He stared at her. Mrs. Alcott apologized, in her own way. "Which is to say?" "She said the town had been unkind and that they were wrong," Clara said. "Then she immediately started talking about squash, so neither of us would have to feel too much about it." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then, "She came to the ranch after Margaret died," he said. "Brought a pie. Stood on the porch for about 30 seconds before I told her I was fine and closed the door on her." He looked at the covered dish. "She's been waiting 2 years to do something useful." "She was doing something useful today," Clara said. "Come eat." He sat down. She uncovered the dish. It was a proper stew, heavy with vegetables, and the kind of slow-cooked beef that meant someone had started it before sunrise, and she watched his face when the smell of it hit him. She watched something young and unguarded move across his expression for just a second, before the habit of composure caught up with it. "That smells like—" He stopped. "Like a kitchen," Clara said simply. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It does." They ate together in the bunkhouse, and it was the best meal they'd had since she'd arrived, and neither of them said that out loud, but both of them knew it, and that knowing sat warm and ordinary between them, like something that belonged there. 3 weeks later, the frame of the new house went up. This was not a quiet event. It could not have been a quiet event, because a house frame going up on a burned homestead meant noise, the kind of noise that traveled, and Nathan had, with some persuasion from Clara and some visible pride that he refused to call by its real name, agreed to let her pay 2 of the carpenters from town to help with the raising. This meant that on a Thursday morning in late September, there were 4 men working on the Cole property, and the sound of hammers reached the road, and by noon, 3 more people had come by to watch. One of them was Tom Harlan, who owned the mill. He stood at the edge of the property line in his good coat, which Clara noticed, and watched the frame going up with an expression she couldn't entirely read. She walked over to him. "Mr. Harlan?" "Miss Whitmore." He tipped his hat. He was a tall, spare man with careful eyes, the kind of man who noticed everything and said only some of it. "Looking like a real structure." "It is a real structure," she said. "Nathan designed the layout himself." "Did he?" Harlan's eyes tracked up to where Nathan was working alongside the carpenters on the far end of the frame. "Good bones to it." "It'll be a good house," Clara said. Harlan was quiet for a moment. "I want to say something to you, Miss Whitmore, and I hope you'll receive it in the spirit it's meant." "Go ahead." "When Nathan first came to me after the fire looking for credit on the lumber, I said no." He paused. "I want you to know I've thought about that since. Nathan Cole was never once late on an account in 6 years of ranching. He lost his wife, and he lost his ranch in 2 years, and I told him I needed money first." He looked at the ground briefly. "That was wrong of me. And the fact that circumstances turned out the way they did doesn't make it less wrong." Clara looked at him steadily. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I suspect you're the kind of person who keeps accounts," he said. "Not money accounts, the other kind. And I'd rather tell you directly that you're not dealing with a man who intends to be that way twice." She studied him for a moment. "Then we understand each other, Mr. Harlan." "I believe we do." He glanced up at the frame again. "If you need anything further from the mill, anything at all, you come to me directly, whatever you need." "I'll remember that," she said. He tipped his hat again and walked back to his wagon, and Clara turned back to the house frame, and she thought about the way things shifted slowly, then suddenly like ice at the end of winter. She thought about Mrs. Alcott and Tom Harlan, and the 2 carpenters who'd worked beside Nathan today, without any visible awkwardness about the scarring on his face, who'd handed him tools and taken direction from him and talked to him the way men talk to each other when they're building something together. She thought about what it had cost him to accept that. She thought about how he'd done it anyway. That evening, when the carpenters had gone and the site was quiet, Nathan stood in the open frame of what would be the front room and looked up through the exposed beams at the early evening sky. Clara came and stood beside him. They were quiet for a while. "Kitchen window faces east," he said finally. She looked at him. "The way I designed it," he said. "I made sure the kitchen window faces east." Clara was quiet for the moment. "Nathan, it's a good direction for a window," he said gruffly, like he needed to make it practical. "Light in the morning is useful." "It is," she agreed. He looked at the sky through the beams. "She would have liked you," he said, very quietly, not looking at her. "Margaret. She didn't have a lot of patience for nonsense, and she said what she thought, and she would have liked you." Clara felt her throat tighten. She kept her voice even. "I would have liked her too," she said. He nodded once. He looked like he might say something else, and then decided against it, and she was glad because she wasn't sure she could have held her composure through anything more than that. They stood in the open frame while the light went down, and it was one of those moments that doesn't announce itself, that you only recognize as significant later when you're trying to explain to yourself how something changed. October came in with a cold edge that surprised Clara, who'd thought of Texas as a place of permanent heat and had not prepared herself for the particular way the high plains turned cold, not gradually but all at once like something decided. She was glad the roof went on the new house the first week of October, because by the second week, the nights were dropping into territory that made the bunkhouse genuinely uncomfortable. Nathan noticed this. I was not a man who mentioned comfort, because comfort was not a concept he organized his life around. But one morning, he came into the bunkhouse and saw her sitting on the cot, wrapped in both blankets, with her coat over her shoulders, and he stopped in the doorway and said without preamble, "We should talk about the house." "Which part of it?" "Which part of it do you think?" he said with a patience that was just barely visible around the edges. "The part where it's the middle of October, and you're sitting there dressed for a blizzard, and there's a roof on that building 40 yards from here." Clara looked at him. "We haven't talked about the—" She stopped. She started again. "The sleeping arrangements." "No," he said. "We haven't." "We're not married," she said. "That's an accurate statement, yes. We haven't—" She stopped again, because what she was trying to say was, "We haven't resolved what we are to each other," and she wasn't sure she wanted to say that directly. Not yet, not until she knew how that sentence ended. Nathan looked at her with the steady patience of a man who had spent most of his adult life navigating situations where the honest thing and the comfortable thing were pointed in different directions. "There's a bedroom on the east side of the house," he said. "And there's a room at the other end that I've been using for storage. We can move the cots in there temporarily. I'm not suggesting anything else, Clara. I'm suggesting you stop sleeping in the cold. The room at the other end doesn't have a door yet. I'll hang one tomorrow." She looked at him for a moment. "You've already thought this through." "I thought it through when the temperature dropped 10 degrees in one night last week," he said. "I just didn't want to say it wrong." And there it was again. That thing she'd noticed in the south pasture, in the way he'd held her hands, in the way he'd come back before dawn to apologize. Nathan Cole was a man who thought carefully about how he said things to her. He didn't always get it right on the first attempt, but he was trying in a way that was visible and genuine, and more than she'd ever had from anyone before. "All right," she said. "We moved to the house." "Good," he said. "I'll put the door up today." She almost smiled. "I thought you said tomorrow." "I reconsidered," he said, and walked out before she could see his face. The house was not finished. There were no curtains and no furniture beyond the cots they moved in, and the kitchen didn't have half its fittings yet. And there was a draft along the north wall that Nathan was irritated about and kept trying to locate the source of. But it had walls and a roof and a floor, and on the first morning that Clara woke up in it, she lay still for a moment and listened to the particular quiet of a new house, different from the quiet of the bunkhouse, more like possibility than absence. And she turned her head toward the east wall and waited. The light came in. Not gold yet. It was October, and the sun was lower, and the angle was different. But it came through the window, and it lay across the unfinished plank floor in a long pale stripe, and Clara looked at it for a long time. Then she got up and she made coffee. Nathan came in from doing the morning check on the horses and stopped when he smelled it. He stood in the kitchen doorway, and she handed him a cup without looking up from what she was doing, and he took it and stood in the east light, and he was quiet for a moment that stretched just a beat longer than usual. "Good window," he said finally. "Best window in the house," she agreed. He drank his coffee. They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. The gossip that arrived 2 weeks later arrived the way it always does in a small town, sideways through someone who claimed they hadn't meant to bring it. Carrying information they'd been more than willing to come all the way out to the property to deliver. The someone in this case was a man named Clyde Bowen, who came to buy one of the recovered horses and stayed 20 minutes longer than the transaction required. It was Nathan who told her that night. He came in late, sat down at the table and said, "You need to know something." She looked up from the accounts. "Tell me." "People are talking about the money," he said. "Not just that you have some, the amount." Clyde Bowen said a man in town, Wick Greer, who runs the land office, has been asking questions about the inheritance, about whether it's under your name or mine, about the property deed. Clara set down her pen. "Wick Greer," she said. "He's been the land agent here for 12 years, Nathan said. He's also—" He paused. "He was the one who brokered the original deed on this property, when I bought it. He charged me twice the standard rate on the commission, and I didn't find that out until it was done. I never had the grounds to do anything about it." "But you remembered." "I remember everything about this land," Nathan said simply. Clara thought about a man who ran a land office and asked careful questions about other people's finances and had a history of charging twice what was fair when he thought he could get away with it. "What exactly was he asking?" she said. "Whether the money stayed yours when you married. Whether a woman could hold an inheritance separate from her husband under Texas law. Whether anyone had done a proper accounting." Nathan looked at her across the table. Whether there was anyone who knew the full amount. The room was quiet for a moment. "He's trying to figure out if there's something to take," Clara said. "That's my read," Nathan said. "I could be wrong." "You're not wrong," she said. She picked up her pen and set it down again. "How well does this town know Wick Greer?" "They know him well enough that they use him," Nathan said. "They don't know him well enough that they'd call him a friend. There's a difference." "There is," Clara said. She thought for a moment. "I want to go to the land office tomorrow." Nathan looked at her. "Clara, I'm not going to cause a scene," she said. "I want to see a man who's been asking about my finances in my absence. I want him to see me. I want him to understand that I know what he's been doing and I know why." "And what does that accomplish?" "It tells him that whatever game he's thinking of playing," Clara said, "the other side of the board has a piece on it he didn't account for." She met Nathan's eyes. "I've dealt with men like Wick Greer before. In St. Louis, in the banking offices, in every room where someone thought a large, plain woman must not understand the details of her own money." She paused. "They always underestimate me. I have learned to use that." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "I'm coming with you," he said. "I know," she said. The land office sat on the main street of Red Hollow between the barber and the telegraph office, with a painted sign that had been left to weather too long and a front window that needed cleaning. Clara pushed through the door with Nathan a half step behind her, and the bell above the door announced them before she could look around. Wick Greer was at his desk. He was a compact, smooth-faced man who gave the impression of reasonableness, the kind of man whose voice was always calibrated, who smiled at the right moments, who made you feel when you left his company, like the conversation had gone exactly as he'd intended, and you were only just now figuring that out. He looked up when they came in, and the smile arranged itself on his face immediately. "Mr. Cole," he said, standing. "Miss Whitmore." "Mr. Greer," Clara said. She did not smile back. She came to the counter and put both hands on it and looked at him with the same clear, direct gaze she'd used when she'd walked up to Nathan's burned homestead, and she said, "I understand you've been asking questions about my inheritance." A flicker. Just a flicker, quickly managed. "I don't know that I'd put it that way, miss." "I would put it that way," Clara said. Several people in this town would put it that way because several people in this town were present for those questions. So let me save you some time and tell you what you want to know. She kept her voice entirely pleasant. My inheritance is held under my name in my name, and will remain in my name, under the terms of my uncle's estate. I have complete documentation and a lawyer in St. Louis, who is aware of both its existence and its location. The amount is not public information. And the land we are standing on is registered in Nathan Cole's name, which means the two separate things cannot be combined by anyone without the consent of both parties. She paused. Does that answer your questions? Greer looked at her. His smile had not moved, but something behind it had changed significantly. I appreciate your directness, Miss Whitmore, he said carefully. I imagine you do, she said. It saves time. Is there anything else I can help you with today? A beat. No, he said. I believe we're quite clear. Good, Clara said. She straightened. She looked at Nathan briefly and then back at Greer. Then we'll be going. Good day, Mr. Greer. She walked back out the door. Nathan followed her, and he waited until they were 10 steps down the boardwalk before he said very quietly, You've done that before. Told a man in a position of authority that I know exactly what he's doing, and I'm not afraid of him, Clara said. More times than I can count. You were magnificent, Nathan said. The word came out simply without decoration, like something that was just plainly true. Clara looked at him sideways. I wasn't looking at her. He was looking straight ahead, and the line of his jaw was composed, and the scarred side of his face was catching the afternoon light, and he said it the way he said most things that mattered without making too much of it, because he believed that things that were true didn't need to be performed. He's not finished, Clara said. No, Nathan agreed. He's not. But now he knows we're watching. He knows you're watching, Nathan said, which is considerably more alarming. She looked at him again. That was a compliment, he said. I know, she said. They walked back to the wagon. The afternoon sun was long and pale over Red Hollow, and the sky was the particular blue that comes in Texas in October, high and clean and enormous, the kind of sky that makes everything below it feel temporary. Clara climbed up to the wagon seat, and Nathan took the reins, and for a moment before he clicked the horses forward, they just sat in the big quiet of that sky. Nathan, she said. Thank you for telling me, about Greer, what Bowen said. He glanced at her. Of course. You could have handled it yourself, she said. You could have gone to Greer on your own and told him to leave things alone. A lot of men would have. A lot of men would have made it worse, Nathan said. And it wasn't mine to handle. He clicked the horses forward. It was yours. Clara looked straight ahead at the road going back toward home. She thought about the burned homestead she'd walked toward on the day she arrived. She thought about the way the land had looked ruined and abandoned, and somehow still itself beneath all the ash. She thought about what things looked like when they were broken. She thought about what they looked like when they began to come back. And as the wagon moved through the long afternoon light toward the house that was going up on the land that Nathan had built, and she had helped rebuild Clara, Whitmore felt something settle in her chest that she did not entirely have a name for, yet something steady and warm and anchored, like a post that's been set right and will hold through whatever winter comes. She let herself feel it, just for a moment. Then she started thinking about what Wick Greer's next move would be, because a man like that always had a next move, and she intended to be ready for it. Wick Greer's next move came faster than Clara expected. It came not through the land office, not through legal channels, not through anything she could have prepared a counter-argument against in advance. It came through the oldest weapon a small town had ever invented, the mouth of a person with nothing to lose and everything to gain from someone else's destruction. His name was Roy Alcott, not Mrs. Alcott from the general store, who had come to the ranch with a covered dish and something close to a real apology. This was her husband's younger brother, a man who drank too much and worked too little, and had the particular bitterness of someone who believed the world owed him something and had never gotten around to paying. Roy Alcott spent most of his evenings at the saloon on the south end of Main Street, and what he spent those evenings doing primarily was talking. Clara found out what he'd been saying on a Friday morning when Rebecca, the younger woman who'd come with Mrs. Alcott to the ranch, appeared at the door of the new house with pink cheeks and a look of someone who had argued herself into coming and was not entirely sure she'd made the right decision. "Miss Whitmore," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I hope you won't think badly of me for it." "Come in," Clara said. Rebecca came in and stood in the unfinished kitchen and twisted her gloves in her hands and said, "Roy Alcott has been telling people that Nathan Cole never rebuilt that ranch himself. He's been saying Nathan found himself a foolish rich woman to pay for everything while he took the credit. He's been saying—" She stopped. She steadied herself. "He's been saying that you're not a partner, that Nathan's using you, that the only reason he didn't send you home on the next stage is because he found out about the money." The kitchen was quiet. "He's been saying this where?" Clara said. "At the saloon, 3 nights running now." Rebecca looked miserable. "Half the men in town have heard it. Some of them are repeating it. Not because they believe it, I don't think, but because it's the kind of story that's easy to repeat," Clara said. "Yes. Who put him up to it?" Rebecca blinked. "I don't—" "Roy Alcott doesn't have opinions about other people's ranches," Clara said. "He has opinions about his next drink. Someone gave him this story. Someone who wanted it out in the town without their own name attached to it." She looked at Rebecca steadily. "Was Wick Greer at the saloon any of those 3 nights?" Rebecca's face did the thing faces do when a person realizes they saw something without registering what it meant. "The first night," she said slowly. "He came in for he said he was just stopping in. He doesn't usually drink there." "No," Clara said. "He wouldn't." Rebecca stared at her. "What are you going to do?" "First," Clara said, "I'm going to thank you for coming to tell me. That took courage, and I want you to know I recognize it." Rebecca flushed. "I just thought you should know." "I should know. Now I do." Clara set down the coffee cup she'd been holding. "Second, I'm going to talk to Nathan." Nathan was in the barn. She found him there doing the methodical work of a man who kept his hands busy because his mind needed somewhere to go. She stood in the doorway and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it before you react." He looked up. She told him. She watched it move through him. Not the anger part which she expected, but the other part that came before the anger, the part that was quieter and darker. She watched the specific hurt of a man hearing the thing he was most afraid was true, spoken out loud in a room full of people who'd repeat it. When she finished, Nathan set down what he was holding. He was quiet for 10 seconds, that felt significantly longer than 10 seconds. "Greer," he said. "Greer," she confirmed. "Using Roy Alcott because Roy Alcott will say anything for the price of a whiskey, and Greer keeps his hands clean." He picked up what he'd put down and then put it down again. "Clara." "Don't," she said. He looked at her. "Don't apologize for what Roy Alcott said," she said. "Don't tell me you're sorry I had to hear it. Don't start down the road of wondering whether there's any truth in it, because I've watched you work this land every day for weeks, and I know what I've seen." Something moved in his face. "I wasn't going to say that." "Good," she said. "Then what were you going to say?" I was quiet for a moment. "I was going to say that this is my fault," he said. "Not the way Roy Alcott means, but—" He stopped working through it. "When word got out about your money, I should have been the one standing up in town and making the shape of things clear. Instead, He stopped again. "I went quiet. I pulled back. Because it was easier than dealing with people looking at me like—" He didn't finish that sentence. "Like you were a man who married money instead of a woman," Clara said. "Yes." "And your going quiet gave the story room to grow." "Yes." They looked at each other. "All right," Clara said. "So now what?" Nathan picked up his hat from the hook on the barn wall. He put it on his head with the deliberate motion of a man who has decided something. "Now," he said, "I'm going to go to town." "Nathan, I'm not going to do anything foolish," he said. "I'm going to go to town, and I'm going to talk to people, plainly, the way I should have been doing all along." He looked at her. You straightened out Greer at the land office. Let me do something. She studied him for a moment. What exactly are you planning to say? The truth, he said. That we're partners. That the ranch is being rebuilt because two people decided to build it together. That anyone who has something to say about my wife is welcome to come say it to my face. Clara went very still. Your wife, she said. Nathan had the look of a man who had just heard himself say something he hadn't planned on saying, which was the look of a man who had been thinking it long enough that it slipped out without permission. He held her gaze. He didn't take it back. Is that? He stopped. He started differently. Clara, I know we haven't talked about it directly. I know the circumstances of how we got here are unusual, she offered. Unusual, he agreed. But I know what I want, if you'll have me, the real way. Not the arrangement we wrote letters about, but... He stopped. He was not a man accustomed to saying things like this, and it showed, but it showed in the best way, in the way that meant it was real. A real marriage, he said. Partners, like we've been, but formal, if you want that. The barn was quiet, except for the horses shifting in their stalls. Clara looked at this scarred, proud, careful man, who had come back before dawn to apologize, who had thought about which direction to face the kitchen window, who had stood in the land office a half step behind her, and let her handle her own business, and called her magnificent, like it was simply a fact. You're doing this now, she said. In the barn, you're proposing to me in the barn. Something happened in his face that was the closest thing to embarrassment she'd ever seen on him. I could... He looked around. I could wait until Nathan. Yes. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Yes, she said again. Ask me properly and I'll say yes properly, but the answer is yes. He let out a breath that he'd apparently been holding for longer than just this conversation. He crossed the distance between them, and he took both her hands, her calloused, work-roughened hands in both of his scarred ones, and he said, Clara Whitmore, will you marry me, properly? I will, she said, properly. He stood there holding her hands, and he looked down at them for a moment, and then he looked up at her face, and there was something in his eyes that was so unguarded and so real that she had to look at him very steadily to hold her own composure together. Good, he said. Good, she agreed. He was quiet for a moment more. Then, I'm still going to town. I know, she said. Go. He went. What happened in Red Hollow that afternoon would be talked about for a long time afterward, not because anything dramatic occurred, but because of the particular quality of the undramatic. Nathan Cole walked into the saloon at 2 p.m, which was not his custom, and he ordered a coffee from the bar, which was not available, so he ordered water, which the barman provided with a look of profound confusion. And then Nathan stood at the bar with his water, and he waited until the room had registered his presence, because in a town this size, a man could not walk into a room without the room knowing he'd arrived. And then he said clearly, and without performance, I understand some of you have been hearing things about my ranch and my situation. I want to give you the accurate version in case the other one's been confusing. The saloon went quiet. Clara Whitmore is going to be my wife, Nathan said. She came west under an honest arrangement, and she has worked harder than any person I have stood beside in my life. What we've built on that ranch we've built together. Her money, my labor, both our planning equal say on every decision. That's a partnership. It's a good one. And anyone who wants to suggest otherwise is welcome to come out to the ranch and look a man in the eye while they say it. He finished his water. He put the glass down. He walked out. Clara heard about it from 3 different people before Nathan got home, each version slightly more embellished than the last. And when Nathan walked in and sat down at the kitchen table, she looked at him and said, 3 people have already told me what you said at the saloon. I didn't say much, he said. You said enough, she said. You also told a room full of people I'm going to be your wife. You said yes. I did, she agreed. I'm just noting that the town found out before Mrs. Alcott, which means she's going to hear it third hand and be irritated about that. Nathan looked at her. Is that a problem? It means she'll want to host something, Clara said. A dinner or a gathering. She'll feel it's her responsibility to organize the social acknowledgement of the engagement. Nathan absorbed this. Is that bad? It's fine, Clara said. It means she's claimed us as part of the town's story. That's actually what we need right now. She paused. We should let her. You think about things 3 steps ahead, Nathan said. I think about things 5 steps ahead, Clara said. I've had to. He looked at her across the table with that steady attention. He had the kind that didn't look away from things, and he said, when we're married, officially, does anything change for you with the money, the inheritance? She met his eyes. What do you mean? I mean, I want to know what's yours and what's mine and what's ours, he said. I want it written down, clearly. I want you to keep your inheritance under your name separate the way you have it. I don't want anyone, including me, to be able to touch it without you saying so. Clara stared at him. Nathan, I mean it, he said. I've thought about this. What happened with Margaret? She didn't have anything of her own. Everything was mine on paper. She trusted me, and I was trustworthy, but that's not how it should work. You came here with your own resources. They stay yours. He paused. The ranch is mine on the deed. We'll put your name on it too. Both names. Everything we build from that stays yours. She looked at him for a long moment. You know that's not what most husbands do, she said. I'm not most husbands, he said simply. Clara felt something she didn't have an exact word for, something that went deeper than gratitude and wider than affection. She looked at the man across the table from her, this scarred and stubborn and unexpectedly principled man, and she thought, there it is. That's it. That's the thing you didn't know you were looking for. All right, she said. We'll have it written down. Good, he said. Nathan, she said. Yeah. You're a better man than you think you are. He was quiet for a moment. Working on it, he said finally. That was the most honest answer she'd ever heard, and she loved him for it. She recognized in that moment, sitting in the unfinished kitchen of a house they'd built together, that she loved him, though she didn't say it out loud. Not yet. Some things needed to be earned first, even when they were already true. The week before the wedding, Wick Greer made his real move. It did not come through Roy Alcott this time. It did not come through whispers in the saloon. It came through a legal document delivered to the ranch by a man from the county seat, a man in a suit who was very apologetic about what he was carrying, and handed it to Nathan at the front door of the new house, and was back on his horse before Nathan had read the first paragraph. Nathan read it once. He read it again. Then he brought it inside and put it on the kitchen table in front of Clara without saying anything. She read it. It was a challenge to the deed on the Cole Ranch property filed on behalf of a prior claim that Greer alleged existed before Nathan's original purchase. The document stated that a previous owner had never properly relinquished rights to a portion of the land, that those rights had passed to an entity that Greer now represented, and that the current occupants were requested to vacate or negotiate a settlement within 30 days. Clara read it twice. She set it down on the table. She was quiet for a moment, that Nathan did not interrupt. He manufactured this, she said. Yes, Nathan said. He's been working on it since we went to the land office, she said. That's why the apology didn't land right. He wasn't frightened, he was buying time. He went back and started building this. He brokered my original deed, Nathan said. He has access to the records. If anyone could manufacture a prior claim, it'd be him, Clara said. Yes. She stood up from the table. Who do you trust in this county? A lawyer. Someone with knowledge of land law who isn't connected to Greer. Nathan thought. There's a man named Prescott in Harper's Creek, he said. 20 miles east. He's handled some disputes in the county. Honest as far as I know. Can we get to him today? If we leave in an hour. Then we leave in an hour, she said. She was already moving. Nathan watched her cross the kitchen with the document in her hand, and something happened in his chest that was the mirror image of what she'd felt the week before, at this same table, that recognition of this is who this person is, and I did not know I needed this until right now. He watched her move through crisis, the way she moved through everything else. Not as if it wasn't frightening because she wasn't foolish, but as if fear was just one of the things you carried, and it didn't have to be in your hands. He got up and got his coat. Prescott was a small, precise man with a cluttered office and the eyes of someone who had read a great many documents and caught a great many lies inside them. He read Greer's filing 3 times without speaking, while Nathan and Clara sat across from his desk, and when he finished the 3rd reading, he set it down and looked up. "Where did you say this was filed?" he said. "County seat," Nathan said. "Arrived at the ranch this morning, and the prior claim references a transaction from—" Prescott looked back at the document, 1871. "Yes. The same year Wick Greer began operating the land office in Red Hollow," Prescott said. A silence. "Is that significant?" Clara said. "It's interesting," Prescott said. He pulled a drawer open and produced a folder thick with paper. "Because I happen to have handled a dispute 3 years ago in this county that also referenced a prior claim from 1871. Different property, different parties. But the structure of the claim was remarkably similar to this one." He looked at them both over his glasses. "I investigated that claim. I found that the document supporting it had been signed by a party who had been dead for 2 years at the time of signing." Nathan went very still. "He's done this before," Clara said. "I could not prove in that case who manufactured the document," Prescott said carefully. "The party who brought the claim who was not Greer directly, but someone connected to him withdrew before it went to hearing." He paused. "I have been waiting in a sense for another version of this to appear. Because men who do something once and get away with it tend to do it again." "He needs to be stopped," Nathan said. His voice was flat and controlled, which Clara had learned was what it sounded like when he was most serious about something. "He needs to be stopped properly," Prescott said, "which means this goes to a hearing, and we prove that this document is fraudulent, which means finding the original records that contradict it, which means—" He looked at Clara. "It means someone needs to go to the county record office and pull the actual 1871 deed transfer documentation before Greer's people can interfere with it." "How quickly?" Clara said. "Yesterday would have been ideal," Prescott said. "Tomorrow morning is what we have." Clara looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Clara. "I'll go," Nathan said. "We'll both go," Clara said. Prescott nodded. "I'll draft a request for the documents. You bring that to the clerk at the county office and you use my name. They know me there." He was already writing. "And while you're doing that, I'll begin preparing a response to this filing." He looked up briefly. "One more thing. The entity Greer claims to represent in this document, it's listed as a land trust. I'd like to know who the actual parties in that trust are. Because in my experience, a man like Greer doesn't file something this complicated without someone behind him with deeper pockets and bigger ambitions." Clara took the document off the desk and looked at the name of the land trust again. Something about it snagged in her mind, not recognition exactly, but the feeling of almost recognition, like a word you know, but can't place. She'd seen that name before, not here, not in Texas, in St. Louis, in her Uncle Edmund's papers. She sat very still for 3 seconds and let that thought settle into certainty before she spoke. "Mr. Prescott," she said, "what would it mean if the entity on this document had previously been involved in a land acquisition in Missouri?" Both men looked at her. "It would mean," Prescott said slowly, "that this isn't a local scheme." "No," Clara said. "I don't think it is." She set the document down. "My Uncle Edmund spent 40 years in business. He was careful, as I told Nathan, but careful men make enemies, not because they do wrong things, but because they stand in the way of other people doing wrong things. Edmund blocked a land acquisition in Missouri 5 years before he died. The party he blocked—" She paused. "The name of their holding company is very close to what's written on that document." The office was silent. "They followed the money," Nathan said. His voice had gone very quiet. "They found out about the inheritance, and they followed it here." "Greer didn't come up with this himself," Clara said. "He was hired, or he was brought in. Someone with a longer reach than Red Hollow decided that my inheritance was worth acquiring, and they found a local man with flexible ethics and gave him a cut to build the mechanism." She looked at Prescott. "This isn't about the ranch. The ranch is the lever. If they can challenge the deed, they can tie us in legal proceedings long enough to do something else. Something I haven't figured out yet. They'd need access to the inheritance directly, Prescott said, which they can't get while it's in your name. So, he stopped. He looked at the wedding date on the document. Clara had provided it when they'd introduced themselves. And now all three of them were looking at the fact that Greer had filed this claim 8 days before Clara Whitmore was scheduled to marry Nathan Cole. They need to invalidate your legal independence before the marriage, Nathan said. He said it like someone pressing on a bruise to make sure it was real. If they can get a court involved in a property dispute that includes you as a party, if they can tie your finances into a legal proceeding. Maybe they thought a woman alone would settle. Maybe they thought the threat would be enough to make you pay them, Clara said. Or panic, Nathan said. And in panicking, do something that gave them access to the account. Prescott had put his pen down. Miss Whitmore, he said. This is bigger than a land filing. I know that, she said. You need to write to your lawyer in St. Louis today, tonight. You need to make sure your account is locked against any third-party claim. And you need to get me those county records tomorrow morning. I know, she said. She stood up. Nathan, can we be to the county seat by nightfall if we ride hard? We can, he said. She held out her hand to Prescott. Thank you. He shook it. Be careful, he said. Men who set up schemes this complicated don't walk away from them easily. They rode hard. The Texas landscape blurred at the edges of the speed they were making, and the horses were tired by the time the lights of the county seat appeared on the horizon. But they were there before the record office closed, and Nathan spoke to the clerk while Clara wrote the letter to her St. Louis lawyer at the desk in the county office's waiting area. Writing fast and clearly, and with the particular focused calm of a woman who had stopped being frightened, because being frightened was no longer useful, the clerk found the 1871 records. Nathan stood at the counter and read through them, and when he turned around, his face had the specific expression of a man who has found the thing he was looking for. The transfer was completed and recorded in full, he said. No outstanding claim, no prior interest. The land was clean when I bought it. He paused. Greer's document is a fabrication. Then we have what we need, Clara said. She sealed the letter. She handed it to the postmaster, who was just closing up, and accepted it with the martyred expression of a man who dealt with last-minute correspondence regularly. They rode back in the dark slower now, the horses grateful for the reduced pace. The night was cold, and the stars were wide over the open land, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Nathan said, Clara. Yes. When this is done and we're going to finish it, I want to talk to you about something. What? About what to do with this, he said. With what Greer tried to build, and who he was working for, and the fact that they thought they could walk into this county and destroy what we've built because one of us was a woman with money, and they thought that was a vulnerability. He paused. I want to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. She looked at him in the dark. His profile was steady against the sky, the scarred side facing her the way it always did when they rode side by side, and she had long since stopped noticing the scars as anything other than just his face. What are you thinking? She said. I'm thinking that Greer has been doing this for years, Nathan said. I'm thinking Prescott had another case that was the same and couldn't pin it. I'm thinking there are probably others we don't know about, families who got a document in the mail and didn't have the resources or the knowledge or the... He stopped. The someone in their corner, Clara said. Yes, he said. I'm thinking when this is done, we make sure Greer answers for all of it. Not just this one, all of it. Clara rode in silence for a moment. That's going to take time, she said. I know. And effort and money, and Prescott, and probably the county judge, and possibly a trip to Austin. Probably, he said. Good, Clara said. He looked at her. I didn't come west to live quietly, she said. I came to build something. If what we build turns out to be bigger than the ranch... She paused. That seems right to me. Nathan rode beside her in the wide dark, and he felt something that he recognized finally after weeks of feeling it without being able to name it. It wasn't gratitude, though, there was gratitude in it. It wasn't admiration, though, there was that, too. It was something simpler and more total than either the feeling of being alongside the right person. of having found in the wreckage of everything he'd thought his life would look like something that was actually better than what he'd planned. He didn't say this out loud. He would say it later, not on horseback in the dark, because he wanted to say it right. But he thought it, and he let himself think it, and it was the most honest thought he'd had in years. "We should push the wedding date up," he said. Clara glanced at him. "How much?" "If their plan depends on you being unmarried and legally separate when they bring this to hearing, then being married before the hearing removes their lever," Clara said. She was quiet for a moment. "How soon can you arrange a minister?" "I'll have someone out to the house by Saturday," Nathan said. Saturday was 4 days away. "All right," Clara said. "Is that enough time to—" "Nathan," she said. "I crossed half a continent with one suitcase. I don't need a great deal of time to prepare for a wedding." I made that low, surprised sound that was the closest thing he had to a laugh. "Fair enough," he said. They rode the rest of the way home in the comfortable silence of two people who have been through enough together that quiet no longer needs to be filled. But neither of them slept easily that night, because they both understood that the document Greer had filed was only the visible part of something larger, and whatever was underneath it had not finished yet, and the people behind it did not intend to stop. The wedding would happen Saturday. The hearing would come after. And somewhere between those two events, Clara knew the full shape of what they were up against would finally become clear, and everything she had built, everything they had built, would be tested in ways that paperwork and preparation might not be enough to answer. But she had faced burned homesteads before. She had walked toward them when every sensible person said to walk away. She looked at the ceiling of the house she had helped build, and she thought, "Whatever comes next, you've handled worse. You've handled everything they threw at you, and you're still here." She closed her eyes. She let herself sleep. She would need it. The minister arrived Saturday morning with mud on his boots and a Bible worn soft at the corners from 30 years of use. And he shook Nathan's hand and tipped his hat at Clara and said he'd been told there was some urgency to the occasion and he was glad to be of service. Clara wore the best dress she had brought from St. Louis. Dark blue wool, not fancy, not meant for weddings, but clean and fitted and hers. She had pressed it the night before with the flat iron she'd bought at the general store in October, and she had done her hair herself, and when she came out of the bedroom and stood in the kitchen doorway, Nathan looked at her the way a man looks at something that stops him mid-thought. He didn't say anything immediately. She raised an eyebrow. "Will I do?" "You'll do," he said. And then, because he was Nathan, and because he was trying, "You look very well, Clara." "You look very well yourself," she said. He had put on his good shirt, the dark one, and shaved carefully, and the morning light caught the scarred side of his face and the unscarred side equally, and she thought he was the best-looking man she had ever stood in a room with. And she did not say that out loud, because it would have embarrassed him, and she was saving it for later. Mrs. Alcott had come. Of course she had come. Nathan had told Tom Harlan on Friday, and Tom Harlan had told his wife, and his wife had told Mrs. Alcott, and Mrs. Alcott had appeared at the ranch at 8 in the morning with Rebecca and 2 other women from town carrying food, because Mrs. Alcott's response to every significant event in life was to bring food, and Clara had decided this was one of her best qualities. Prescott had ridden up from Harper's Creek. He stood near the window in his good coat and watched the proceedings with the expression of a man who was glad to be present, and was also filing everything away for later professional use, which was simply how he related to the world, and Clara had accepted it. The ceremony was short. The minister read the words that needed to be read, and Nathan and Clara said the words that needed to be said. And when it was done, Nathan put a ring on her finger, his mother's ring, he'd told her the night before, which he'd kept in his saddlebag through the fire, because it had been in his coat pocket the night the barn burned, and she had understood without him saying so that he'd carried it through the worst year of his life, without knowing why, and it fit, which seemed to mean something to him in a way that went beyond the practical. He kissed her once, brief and serious, the way he did most things that mattered. Mrs. Alcott cried. Rebecca cried. Tom Harlan looked at the ceiling, and then looked back down with suspiciously bright eyes, and said something about the quality of the light in the room. Nathan shook Prescott's hand, and then shook it again. And Clara stood in the kitchen of the house she had helped build, and felt the ring on her finger and thought, "You are exactly where you are supposed to be." It was the first time in her life she had thought that and meant it completely. The celebration lasted 2 hours, which was all the time any of them could spare on a working ranch in late October. The food was extraordinary. Mrs. Alcott had outdone herself, and even Nathan ate more than Clara had ever seen him eat in one sitting, which she noted as a significant occasion. Then Prescott drew Nathan and Clara aside into the front room, and the quality of the afternoon changed. "I've been doing some work," he said. He produced papers from the inside of his coat. Prescott always had papers in the inside of his coat. Clara had decided this was structural to who he was as a person and spread them on the table. "The land trust Greer named in the filing. I've traced it." "And," Nathan said, "it connects to a holding company out of Kansas City," Prescott said, "which connects to a larger entity, a land speculation group that has been operating throughout the Western Territories for the past decade. They identify properties with disputed histories, manufacture or exploit legal weaknesses, acquire them below value through legal pressure and resell them." He paused. "They've done this to 11 properties in 4 states that I've been able to identify. 2 of those property owners lost everything. The rest settled for fractions of their land's worth." Clara looked at the papers. "And they came here for the inheritance," she said. "The inheritance was the initial target," Prescott said. "But the ranch has value too good water rights the rebuilding you've done the location. They want both." He looked at Clara directly. "They identified you in St. Louis. Someone in your uncle's legal circles talked. They tracked the inheritance to Texas, found the burned ranch, found Greer, and built the mechanism." Nathan's jaw was tight. "How long have they been planning this?" "Since at least June," Prescott said. "Possibly before you arrived, Clara." The room was quiet. "They knew I was coming," Clara said slowly. "Before I got off the stagecoach, someone somewhere knew I was coming and had already started building a case." "Possibly," Prescott said. "I can't prove that piece yet." "But Greer wasn't surprised when I walked into his office," Clara said. "Not a question. She was remembering the land office, remembering the way Greer's smile had arranged itself too quickly, too smoothly, like a man who'd rehearsed for the arrival of a particular visitor. He already knew who I was." "That would be my assessment," Prescott said. Nathan stood very still for a moment. Clara could see him working back through the months, through every interaction with Greer, every piece of town gossip, every casual question someone had asked about the ranch or the rebuild or the money. She could see him recalibrating. "The hearing," Nathan said. "When?" 3 weeks, Prescott said. "Which gives us time, but not a great deal of it. We have the county records proving the original deed was clean. We have the structural similarity to the previous case. What we need—" He paused. "What would make this airtight is a direct connection between Greer and the Kansas City operation. A letter. A payment record. Something that shows he was acting as their agent, not independently." "How do we get that?" Clara said. Prescott looked at her steadily. "That's what I've been thinking about," he said. "And I have an idea, but it requires you to do something uncomfortable." "Tell me," she said. "Greer thinks he's ahead of you," Prescott said. "He filed the claim before the wedding, assuming you'd be unmarried and rattled and easier to deal with. He doesn't know you went to the county records. He doesn't know what we have." He paused. "I'd like to keep him not knowing, for about 10 more days." "You want us to behave as if we're frightened," Clara said. "I want you to behave as if you're considering settling," Prescott said. "As if the claim has you worried and you're thinking about negotiating. Because if Greer believes you're about to come to the table, he'll communicate with his principals in Kansas City. He'll need to tell them the target is moving, and those communications can be intercepted," Nathan said. "The telegraph office here runs through the county seat," Prescott said. "I have a relationship with the county clerk there. He is not a dishonest man, but he is a practical one, and he has seen what Greer's type does to this region, and he does not like it." He paused. "If Greer sends a wire to Kansas City in the next 10 days, I will know what it says." Clara thought about this. She thought about the particular discipline it would require to walk past Wick Greer on Main Street and look worried instead of certain. To let him believe for 10 days that he was winning. She thought about what it would cost Nathan, who was constitutionally incapable of performing uncertainty. He didn't feel to play that game. She looked at Nathan. He was already looking at her. "Can you do it?" she asked quietly. "I don't like it," he said. "I know. Can you do it?" A beat. "Yes," he said. "If you're with me." "I'm with you," she said. Prescott tucked his papers back into his coat, with the satisfaction of a man whose plan has been accepted. "There's one more thing," he said more carefully. "The previous case I mentioned, the one where the party withdrew before hearing. The family that lost their land. I've been in contact with them." He looked between Nathan and Clara. "They're willing to testify. If it goes to a formal proceeding against Greer and the Kansas City operation, they'll come forward." "That changes the scale of this," Nathan said. "Yes," Prescott said. "It stops being a dispute about one deed and becomes a fraud case. Criminal, potentially, not just civil." He paused. "That's a longer fight, more complicated, more expensive." Clara looked at him. "Mr. Prescott, do you believe Wick Greer has ruined other people's lives with this scheme?" "I believe he has contributed substantially to that outcome, yes." "And if we settle quietly and make our problem go away," he continues, "almost certainly." "Then we don't settle quietly," Clara said. "We finish it." Nathan looked at her. "All of it," she said. Something in his face, something that had been held carefully in check all afternoon, released slightly. Like a man who'd been waiting to hear a particular thing and had just heard it. "All of it," he agreed. Prescott nodded once with the contained satisfaction of a man who chose his clients well. The 10 days that followed were among the hardest Clara had lived through, and she had lived through a considerable number of hard things. The performance required its own particular courage, different from the courage of walking toward a burned homestead or facing a man in a land office. This was the courage of deliberate stillness, of holding a composed and worried face while her mind worked furiously underneath. She and Nathan walked into town twice that week, and both times they chose to walk past the land office slowly, and both times Clara made sure she looked at the door with the expression of a woman carrying a weight she wasn't sure she could manage. Nathan was better at this than she'd expected. He was quiet in town, which was not unusual for him, but he let the quiet carry a different quality, something heavier, something uncertain. He answered questions about the claim with the short, careful answers of a man who was afraid of saying the wrong thing, and she watched people notice it, and watched the news of Nathan Cole's uncharacteristic worry travel through Red Hollow, the way all news traveled through Red Hollow, which was quickly and thoroughly. By the 4th day, Mrs. Alcott had appeared at the ranch again. Not with food this time, with her hands clasped and her face set in the particular configuration of a woman who had something to say and had decided to say it. "I've heard about the claim," she said, sitting in the kitchen. "From 3 people who all told me not to tell anyone." "Small towns," Clara said. "Is it serious?" Mrs. Alcott said. "Don't manage me. I've been managed before, and I don't care for it." Clara looked at her. She liked Mrs. Alcott. She had liked her since the covered dish and the real apology. She made a decision. "It's being handled," she said, which was true, and also less than everything. "I appreciate you asking directly." Mrs. Alcott's eyes narrowed slightly. She was a woman who recognized partial truth when she heard it, but she accepted it. "Greer," she said. Clara said nothing. "I'm not asking you to confirm it," Mrs. Alcott said. I'm saying his name, because he's been here a long time and people have trusted him, and I think perhaps they shouldn't have, and I think perhaps I am not the only person in this town who has thought that." She stood up. "If there's something ordinary people can do, when the time comes, I'd want to know." "I'll tell you," Clara said. "When the time comes." On the 7th day, Prescott rode up to the ranch at dusk, with his coat muddy from a fast ride and his eyes bright with something that was close to vindication. Nathan had the door open before Prescott's horse stopped. "He sent 3 wires," Prescott said, walking in and pulling papers from his coat. Different papers this time, copied transcriptions in the county clerk's careful hand. 1 to Kansas City, 2 to an address in Denver that connects to the same operation. He put them on the table. Clara and Nathan read them together. The first wire was Greer to Kansas City target moving. Negotiation likely. Recommend increasing pressure. Secondary documentation ready. The second wire, Kansas City to Greer proceed. Secure settlement before hearing. Full payment on completion. The third wire, Greer to Denver original claim holding. Additional leverage identified medical situation. Local goodwill compromised. Expect resolution within 2 weeks. Nathan read the third wire twice. Medical situation, he said. What does that mean? I don't know yet, Prescott said. But it suggests they have information about someone in your circle that they believe constitutes leverage. He looked at Clara. Has anyone in your household been ill recently? No, Clara said. And then something moved in her memory. Rebecca, she said. Both men looked at her. She mentioned 3 weeks ago that her father had been ill, Clara said. I didn't think anything of it. It seemed like ordinary conversation. But she's been... Clara stopped running back through recent weeks. She's been at the ranch more than usual, asking questions she didn't used to ask, about the legal situation, about the money. She felt something cold settle in her chest. She's a good person, she said. I believe that. But a good person can be desperate. If her father needs medical care, Prescott said carefully, and someone offered money in exchange for information. She wouldn't know she was doing something wrong, Clara said. She'd think she was just answering questions, just talking. She looked at Nathan. We have to be careful about what we say around her, but we can't let her know we suspect anything because she doesn't know what she's part of. Nathan was very still. She was at the wedding. Yes, Clara said. She doesn't know she's being used. That's what this operation does. It uses people who are scared and desperate and would never knowingly help destroy someone they care about. She paused. That's a piece of evidence in itself. That's the kind of thing Prescott can show a judge about how this operation works. Prescott was already writing. You're right, he said. The methodology, the systematic exploitation of community relationships, the use of unwitting intermediaries, that's a pattern that speaks to organized fraud, not opportunism. He looked up. We have enough. I want to file a counter-motion tomorrow requesting the hearing be escalated and widened in scope, before Greer knows we have these wires. Will that work? Nathan said. The judge in this county is named Hargrove, Prescott said. He is 72 years old, and he has spent his entire career in this region, and he has an absolute fury toward land speculators that I believe predates his appointment to the bench by at least 20 years. He allowed himself a small, precise smile. He will find the scope of this interesting. Nathan looked at Clara. Clara looked at the transcribed wires on the table. She thought about the 11 families Prescott had identified. The 2 who had lost everything. The ones who had settled for fractions and spent years rebuilding. She thought about Rebecca's father sick somewhere, his daughter unknowingly feeding information to people who saw human desperation as a business resource. File it, she said. 3 days before the hearing, everything nearly came apart. It came apart in the form of a man who arrived at the ranch on horseback at 7 in the morning. Not Prescott, not anyone from town, but a stranger in a good coat who identified himself as a representative of the Kansas City operation and asked with the smooth politeness of a man who'd delivered similar messages before to speak with Mrs. Cole. Nathan had answered the door. He let the man speak his opening sentence and then said very quietly, "This conversation is over." The man smiled. "Mr. Cole, I'd encourage you to hear what I have to say before—" "My wife and I have legal representation," Nathan said. "Anything you want to say can be said to our attorney in the presence of a judge." He held the door open. "Get off my property." The man's smooth expression developed a crack in it. "There's an offer on the table, Mr. Cole, that you would be well advised." "Last time I'll say it," Nathan said. Something in Nathan's voice, the absolute flatness of it, the complete absence of negotiation, reached the man in the good coat in a way that the words themselves might not have. He looked at Nathan for a moment. He looked at the door being held open. He put his hat back on and walked back to his horse and rode down the road without looking back. Nathan closed the door. Clara had been standing 6 feet behind him, and she had heard the entire exchange, and when Nathan turned around, she looked at him and said, "You knew I was there. I knew you were there. You handled it." "I handled it," he said, and then quietly, "Was that all right?" She looked at him. This man who had fought so hard with his own pride about accepting her resources, who had spent months learning how to let someone stand beside him without feeling diminished by, it was asking her if it was all right that he had stood at his own door and defended his own home. "Nathan," she said, "that was exactly right." He nodded once. Something released in his shoulders. "He'll go to Greer," Clara said. "He already is," Nathan said, "which means Greer knows we're not settling." "Then we need to be at that hearing," Clara said. "We will be," Nathan said. The hearing was held on a Tuesday in the county courthouse, a room that smelled of old wood and lantern oil and the particular gravity of decisions that mattered. Judge Hargrove was exactly as Prescott had described, a compact, white-haired man whose fury was contained but visible the way a banked fire is still hot even when it's not flaming. Greer arrived with a lawyer from outside the county, which caused a ripple in the room, because it meant Greer had spent money, which meant the Kansas City operation was backing him properly. Clara sat beside Nathan at the respondents' table, and she felt the room, and she felt her own heartbeat, which was fast, but not panicked, and she thought, "You have the county records, you have the wires, you have Prescott, you have Nathan, you have done everything that could be done." She put her hands flat on the table, and she breathed. The first hour was procedural. Filings presented objections, noted the structure of the claim laid out by Greer's outside lawyer in the measured language of a man who had made similar arguments in similar rooms before. Clara listened carefully and noticed the places where the argument was strong and the places where it assumed things it couldn't prove, and she passed 3 notes to Prescott, and Prescott used 2 of them. Then Prescott stood up and requested permission to present counter evidence. Judge Hargrove granted it. What Prescott presented took 45 minutes. He presented the county records showing the original 1871 deed transfer, clean and complete, directly contradicting Greer's claimed prior interest. He presented the structural comparison to the previous case. He presented a statement from the family who had lost their land, read into the record because they could not make the journey in time, but had sent it with Prescott's instruction that it be precise and factual, and it was both. He presented the transcribed wires, and here the room changed, physically, changed the way a room does when a thing is said that everyone has suspected, and now can no longer unsuspect. And he explained the connections between Greer, the Kansas City operation, and the broader pattern of systematic land fraud across 4 states. Greer's lawyer objected 7 times. Judge Hargrove overruled 6 of them and sustained 1 with the expression of a man making minimum concessions. And then Prescott said, "Your Honor, we have reason to believe the entity named in this filing is the same entity that has defrauded 11 families in this region over the past decade, and we are requesting that this hearing be referred to the county prosecutor's office for criminal investigation." The room was absolutely silent. Greer at the opposing table had gone the color of old ash. His outside lawyer leaned over and said something in his ear. Greer shook his head once. The lawyer said something else. Greer shook his head again, and then he said something back, and the lawyer sat back with the expression of a man recalculating his professional involvement. Judge Hargrove looked at Greer directly. "Mr. Greer," he said, "is there anything you'd like to say before I rule on this referral request?" Greer looked at the table. He looked at the papers in front of him. He looked at the transcribed wires which were visible from where he sat. He looked at Clara. She met his gaze steadily. Not with triumph, she was too tired for triumph, and too clear-eyed about how much was still ahead. Just steadily, the way she'd looked at Nathan on the day she'd arrived at the burned homestead. Gathering accurate information. Not looking away. Greer looked back at his papers. "No, Your Honor," he said, very quietly. Judge Hargrove ruled that the prior claim was fraudulent, dismissed it in its entirety, and referred the matter to the county prosecutor with a written recommendation for criminal investigation. He also issued a temporary injunction preventing any further filings against Coal Ranch property by any entity connected to the named land trust, pending the outcome of the investigation. When Greer walked out of the courthouse, he did not look at Nathan or Clara. He walked out with his head down, his outside lawyer 2 steps behind him, and Clara watched him go, and felt something that was not satisfaction exactly, but was adjacent to it. The feeling of a thing being set right, that had been wrong for a long time, and the knowledge that the setting right was real and documented and would be hard to undo. Nathan stood beside her on the courthouse steps. After a moment, he said, "Prescott was right about the judge." "Prescott is usually right," Clara said. "How are you feeling?" She thought about it honestly. "Tired," she said. "And like there's more to do." "There is more to do," he said. "But not today." "Not today," she agreed. He put his hat on against the afternoon sun. He didn't move toward the wagon yet. He stood on the courthouse steps with his scarred face in the light and his hands at his sides, and he said without looking at her, "I want to do something." "What?" "For the families Prescott identified," he said. "The ones who lost land, the ones who settled. I want to—" He stopped because he was working out what he wanted while he was saying it, and she let him work. "The land we have, the water right, the position we're going to be in when the criminal case moves forward, and the Kansas City operation gets unwound." He paused. "Clara, your money built that clinic idea we talked about in the outline. But what if we built something the ranch could sustain on its own?" she said. "Long term, not just once." He looked at her. "I've been thinking about it too," she said. "The people in this region don't have resources when something goes wrong. Medical care, legal help, someone to stand between them and a man like Greer. We have a ranch that's working now. We have—" She paused. "We have more than most people ever get." "What do we do with more than most people ever get?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "We build something worth building," he said. "Yes," she said. He reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically, not as a gesture meant to be observed. He just took her hand, the way people take each other's hands when they've been through something real together, and they're standing on the far side of it, and they need a point of contact with the person who stood beside them. She held on, and they stood there in the courthouse steps, in the October light, married 4 days, and standing on the edge of everything that came next. And the thing that came next was big and complicated, and would require all of them, all the money, and all the knowledge, and all the stubbornness, and all the love that was still even now finding its full shape between them. But it was theirs. Everything ahead of them was theirs. And that was, Clara thought, more than enough. The criminal investigation into Wick Greer and the Kansas City operation opened the following week, and it opened like a door that had been stuck for a long time, slowly at first, and then all at once, with a force that surprised everyone, except the people who had been pushing on it. Prescott drove it. He was the kind of man who found fraud personally offensive in a way that went beyond professional obligation, and he worked the case with a focused intensity that Clara recognized in herself and respected enormously. He rode to the county seat twice a week. He corresponded with lawyers in Kansas City and Denver. He found 2 more families in neighboring counties who had received fraudulent claim documents and had settled quietly believing they had no recourse, and he convinced both of them that they did. Nathan handled the ranch. This was not a small thing. The criminal case was time-consuming and emotionally expensive, and someone had to keep the actual work moving: the cattle that had been acquired with Clara's resources and Nathan's knowledge, the fences that needed the attention, that winter demanded the 100 daily decisions that a working ranch required from the person who understood it. Nathan did all of this without complaint, and without making Clara feel that she owed him anything for it, which was a thing she noticed every single day. She told him so one evening in December, when they were sitting by the fire after a long day, and he looked at her with mild surprise and said, "It's my ranch too, Clara." "I know that," she said. "Then why are you thanking me for doing what's mine to do?" She thought about it. "Because I spent 31 years in a world where men kept accounts of what they did for women," she said, and then presented the bill. Nathan was quiet for a moment. He looked at the fire. "I'm not keeping an account," he said. "I know you're not," she said. "That's what I'm thanking you for." He reached over and pulled her hand into his, the way he'd been doing since the courthouse steps, without ceremony, without making it a moment, just because it was where her hand belonged, and he'd stopped pretending otherwise. She leaned her head against his shoulder. The fire went quiet between them. It was the best evening she could remember in a very long time. The first major testimony in the criminal case happened in January. The family Prescott had found a man named Elias Boone and his wife Sarah, who had lost 60 acres in the northeastern part of the county 3 years earlier, came forward with documents and a clarity of memory that came from people who had spent 3 years living with the consequences of what had been done to them. Elias Boone was a thin, weathered man who sat in the county prosecutor's office and answered every question in a level voice, and the only time his voice changed was when he described the morning they had received the claim document and Sarah had sat down on the porch steps and cried because she'd known in that moment that they were going to lose the land her father had broken himself to build. Clara was present for that testimony. She was there because Prescott had asked her to be, because her documentation of the connection between the Kansas City operation and her Uncle Edmund's blocked Missouri deal was part of the evidentiary chain, and because the prosecutor wanted her available for questions. But she was also there because she had wanted to hear it, to sit in that room and understand completely what they were fighting and why it needed to be finished. When Elias Boone described the morning with the porch steps and Sarah's tears, Clara felt Nathan's hand find hers under the table. She held on and did not let herself look away. The prosecutor's name was Caldwell, a man with considerable experience and a low tolerance for operations that preyed on rural families who lacked legal resources, which was a quality that Prescott had confirmed before they'd ever met him. Caldwell took the case with a thorough seriousness that was visible in the way he moved through documents and asked follow-up questions and wrote things down with the particular focus of someone building something intended to hold. After Boone's testimony, Caldwell called Clara in alone. Nathan waited in the corridor. He was not the type to pace, so he stood very still by the window with his hat in his hands. And when she came back out 40 minutes later, he looked at her face first, checking the way he'd started doing the way she had slowly learned to let him do, and she nodded once to tell him she was all right. "He's going to take it to the grand jury," she said quietly. Nathan let out a breath. "He believes we have enough to indict Greer and at least 2 principals in the Kansas City operation," she said. "The paper trail from the wires connects to payments. The payments connect to a pattern across 4 states." She paused. "He thinks the operation may be larger than what Prescott found. He thinks there are more families." Nathan looked at her. "How many more?" "He doesn't know yet," she said. "He's still building the picture." She put her hand on Nathan's arm. "He asked me if I was willing to testify at the grand jury proceeding." "Are you?" "I already said yes," she said. Something moved in his face that she'd learned to read as pride, the quiet kind, the kind he didn't perform. "Of course you did," he said. "You're not going to tell me to be careful." "You're already careful," he said. "You don't need me to tell you." She looked at him for a moment. "Nathan Cole," she said, "you are a genuinely good man." He looked slightly uncomfortable, the way he always did when she said something direct and true about him. "Don't make it strange," he said. "I'll make it strange if I like," she said. "I'm your wife." They walked out of the courthouse into the January cold, and she tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, and they walked to the wagon, and the town of Red Hollow spread itself around them the way it always did, now familiar and imperfect, and theirs. The grand jury convened in February. By then, something in Red Hollow had shifted in a way that Clara hadn't anticipated and couldn't have engineered. Something organic, something that grew from the case, the way a plant grows from soil that's been properly tended. People in town had heard enough by February to understand the shape of what Greer had been doing. Not the legal details, those were complicated, and half of them were still under proceeding, but the human shape. The story of Elias and Sarah Boone had moved through the county the way true stories move, which is differently from gossip, heavier and slower, and with more staying power. People were angry. Not the hot public anger of a crowd that needs someone to shout at. The quieter anger of people who recognized that something had been happening in their community for years, and they hadn't seen it, and the not seeing felt like a failure they needed to respond to. Mrs. Alcott organized a meeting. Clara found out about it when Mrs. Alcott appeared at the ranch on a Tuesday morning and said, I need to talk to you about something. I hope you'll hear me out before you say no. Sit down, Clara said. Tell me. There are families in this county who've lost things they shouldn't have lost, Mrs. Alcott said, not just to Greer, to situations like Greer's, to men who understood that isolated people without resources were easier to take from. She folded her hands on the kitchen table. There's been talk about what could prevent this, practically, going forward. She paused. Someone said that what this county needed was a place where people could go when things went wrong. Not just medical, though, that too, but legal, information, help navigating things that people without your education or your resources can't navigate alone. She looked at Clara directly. People are saying you'd be the one to build something like that. I'm here to tell you that they're right. Clara was quiet for a moment. She thought about the conversation she and Nathan had had on the courthouse steps. About what you did with more than most people ever got. Who is people, she said. Tom Harlan, Mrs. Alcott said. The Boone family who can't stop talking about you. Rebecca, who I think is going to spend the rest of her life making up for something she won't tell me directly. She paused. Prescott, who mentioned it to Nathan, who mentioned it to Tom, who mentioned it to me. Prescott put you up to this, Clara said. Prescott suggested the meeting, Mrs. Alcott said. I organized it. There's a difference. Clara almost smiled. How many people are coming? 23, Mrs. Alcott said. If you agree to host it. Clara looked at her kitchen table. At the house that had been a burned foundation 7 months ago. At the window facing east that filled with morning light. Saturday, she said. 10 in the morning. Tell people to bring their ideas, not just their opinions. There's a difference. Mrs. Alcott smiled, a real one, the kind that reached her eyes. I'll tell them, she said. Nathan came in from the barn that afternoon and found Clara at the table with papers spread in front of her, and a look he recognized as the particular expression she wore when she was building something in her mind before she built it anywhere else. Mrs. Alcott told me she came by, he said. She did. 23 people Saturday. 23 people Saturday, she confirmed. She looked up. I need you to tell me something honestly. When have I not? When this is done, the criminal case, the investigation, all of it. What do you want the ranch to be? Not just financially, in terms of what it means. She met his eyes. Because I have ideas. But they involve the ranch, and that means they involve you, and I won't build something on your land without your full agreement. Nathan sat down across from her. He looked at the papers she'd been working on. He looked at her face. Tell me the ideas, he said. She told him. It took 40 minutes and 3 cups of coffee, and he asked questions throughout, precise, practical questions, the ones that came from a man who understood land and labor, and what things actually cost in time and resources rather than money alone. She answered every question, and the ones she didn't have answers to, she said so, and they worked through those together, and by the end of the 3 cups of coffee, something had taken shape between them that was more than a plan. It was a purpose. The ranch supports the operation, Nathan said finally. Practically, we grow what we grow, we run what we run, and the proceeds help fund what a fund an office. A center, Clara said. Here. On this property, eventually a separate building, where people can come for legal information, medical referrals, help with documents and filings, and the kind of bureaucratic navigation that defeats people who've never had to learn it. She paused. Prescott would consult. He's already said he'd give time. And there are 2 women in Harper's Creek who trained as nurses. The county has never had proper medical coverage. You've already talked to Prescott, Nathan said. And the nurses, she said. I wanted to know if it was possible before I brought it to you. He looked at her for a long moment. Clara. I should have asked you first, she said. I know that. Old habits I'm accustomed to. Clara, he said again, not sharply, just her name, stopping her. I'm not bothered that you talked to Prescott first. He paused. He looked at the table. I'm trying to understand what you've built here. In 7 months. You arrived on a stagecoach to a burned ranch and a broken man, And you're sitting here telling me you've already talked to Prescott and 2 nurses, and you have 23 people coming on Saturday, and—" He stopped. He looked up. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "See what isn't there yet," he said, "and just start building it." She looked at him. "It's the only thing I know how to do," she said quietly. "Every place I've ever been, I was told there wasn't enough. There wasn't enough room for me, or enough possibility, or enough of whatever thing was being distributed that day. And I learned very early that if you wait for someone to hand you enough, you'll wait your whole life." She paused. "So I stopped waiting and started building. It's not remarkable. It's remarkable," he said, firmly, not arguing, just correcting the record. She looked at him. "Let the record show," he said, "that Nathan Cole told his wife she was remarkable, and he meant every word of it." Something happened in her face that she couldn't entirely control. Something open and young and a little overwhelmed. The thing that happened when he said true things about her plainly, which she was still not entirely accustomed to, which she suspected she might never be entirely accustomed to, and had decided that was all right. "The record shows it," she said. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand once. "Saturday," he said. 23 people. Let's do it." The meeting on Saturday became the thing that people in Red Hollow talked about for years afterward, not because anything extraordinary occurred in terms of the meeting itself, but because of what came out of it. 26 people came, not 23. The extra 3 had heard about it through the particular mechanism of small-town information, and had simply arrived, which Nathan noted to Clara in a low voice, as people were finding seats, and which Clara had anticipated because she'd set out enough cups for 30. Prescott was there in his good coat with his papers. Tom Harlan was there sitting straight-backed and attentive. Mrs. Alcott managed the food with an efficiency that was genuinely impressive. Elias and Sarah Boone had come 60 miles. Clara had not known they were coming. When she saw them walk in, she crossed the room and took Sarah Boone's hand in both of hers, and Sarah Boone looked at her and said, "We came because we want to help build the thing that would have helped us." And Clara had to take one careful breath before she answered. "That's exactly why we need you here," she said. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Nathan spoke twice, once at the beginning, when he laid out what they had in terms of land and practical capacity, which he did with the factual directness that people trusted because there was no performance in it. And once near the end, when a man in the back raised the question that was in everyone's mind. "Who runs this? Whose authority is it under?" Nathan said, "My wife's." The room was quiet. "I run the ranch," he said. "Clara runs this. That's how we've handled everything else, and it's worked better than anything I managed alone." He looked around the room. "She sees what isn't there yet. I keep what's already there standing. Between those 2 things, we've managed all right." Nobody argued. Clara thought she might actually have to excuse herself for a moment, which she did not do because she was not the excusing herself type, but it was a near thing. By the end of the meeting, they had commitments of labor from 6 families, professional consultation from Prescott and the 2 nurses from Harper's Creek, a donation of lumber from Tom Harlan for the building, and a name suggested by Sarah Boone quietly as things were wrapping up. "The Cole Center," Sarah said. "Because they rebuilt from nothing. That's what this is, for rebuilding from nothing." Clara started to say it didn't need to be named after them. Nathan said, "We'll take it," before she could finish. She looked at him. He looked back steadily. "People need to know whose name is on it," he said. "They need to know who's accountable. That's us." She couldn't argue with that. The grand jury returned its indictment in March. Greer was indicted on 4 counts of fraud and 2 of conspiracy. 2 principals in the Kansas City operation were indicted alongside him. A third man, the one who had appeared at the ranch in his good coat, was indicted on conspiracy charges that connected him to cases in 3 states. The indictments were served on a Thursday morning. Clara was in the kitchen when Prescott rode up with the news, and she heard him tell Nathan at the door, and she set down what she was holding and stood very still for a moment and let herself feel the full weight of it. Not triumph, because it was too complicated for triumph, but something like justice, which felt different, heavier and more real. She walked out to the porch. Prescott was already smiling the precise, contained smile of a man who had built something careful and watched it hold. "It's done," he said. "The first part anyway." "The trials," she said. "Will take time," he said. "But the indictments are solid. Caldwell knows what he's doing. Greer doesn't have the resources to fight this properly now that the Kansas City operation has cut him loose." He paused. "They tend to do that. Cut loose the local man when the exposure gets too high. Which makes him more likely to cooperate," Nathan said. "Considerably," Prescott said. "I expect we'll hear from his lawyer within the week." Clara looked out at the land, at the rebuilt fences, the cattle in the south pasture, the frame of the new building going up at the edge of the property, the coal center in Sarah Boone's naming. She thought about the March morning and what it meant that they were standing here having this conversation on this land that had been taken from Nathan by fire and nearly taken again by fraud and was still here. They were still here. "Mr. Prescott," she said. "Mrs. Cole, thank you," she said, "for all of it. From the first day in your office to this morning. Thank you." Prescott looked at her with genuine warmth, which was not his most common expression, but which suited him when it appeared. "It has been," he said carefully, "the most satisfying case of my professional life." He paused. "I expect the next one will be too." "The next one," Nathan said. "There are 2 other families I've identified in neighboring counties," Prescott said. "Similar patterns. I was going to bring them to you when this concluded." He reached into his coat for papers, which was pure Prescott impeccable timing. "If you're interested." Clara and Nathan looked at each other. "Leave the papers," Clara said. He left the papers. He rode back toward Harper's Creek with the look of a man who had done a good day's work, and Clara stood on the porch with Nathan beside her, and the March wind moving across the land, and she thought about the morning she had arrived here, the stagecoach, the burned ground, the man who had told her to leave. She thought about walking toward him anyway. She thought about how much had been built since that morning. Not just the house, not just the ranch though, those were real and solid, and hers in a way that went bone deep. But the other things. The case that would close a fraud operation that had stolen from families across 4 states. The center that would give future families somewhere to go when they were standing in their own equivalent of a burned homestead, unsure if anything could be saved. The 26 people who had sat in her kitchen and decided to build something together. Rebecca, who had come to her privately the week before and told her with red eyes and shaking hands what she had done. The questions she'd answered, the information she'd shared, not understanding what it was being used for. Clara had listened to the whole of it. She had told Rebecca that she was not responsible for what she didn't know. She had told her that the best thing now was to give a statement to Caldwell that corroborated the pattern of how the operation used local relationships. Rebecca had said she would, and she had, and Caldwell had said it was useful, and Clara believed that the courage it took for Rebecca to do that was the most useful part. She thought about all of it standing on the porch in March. "Hey," Nathan said. She looked at him. "Where'd you go?" he asked. "Everywhere," she said. "All the way back to the stagecoach." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the land the way he always looked at it, with the particular attention of a man who had lost it once and therefore never stopped seeing it. "I told you to leave," he said. "The day you arrived. I told you there was nothing here for you." "You did." "I was wrong," he said. "You were wrong," she agreed pleasantly. He made the low sound that was almost a laugh. "You're not going to let me be gracious about it." "You can be gracious," she said. "I'll just also be accurate." He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him. They stood on the porch of the house they had built on the land they had rebuilt on the morning the case that would undo the men who'd tried to take it from them had finally cracked open in the right direction, and the wind moved across the grass, and the cattle moved in the south pasture, and somewhere on the edge of the property, the framing for the coal center stood against the sky. "Clara," Nathan said. "Yes." "I need to tell you something." She looked up at him. His face in the morning light was the face she knew now, the scars and the steadiness and the eyes that didn't look away from things. The face of the man who had come back before dawn to apologize, who had faced the kitchen window east, who had said "my wife" before he meant to and hadn't taken it back. "Then tell me," she said. "I love you," he said. Simply. Without decoration, without performance in the tone of voice he used for things that were just plainly true. I didn't know how to say it right for a long time, and I'm not sure this is right exactly, but I'm saying it now because I should have said it sooner, and I don't want to keep not saying it. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 31 years of being told she wasn't enough. 31 years of rooms that went quiet when she entered, and men who looked past her, and a world that had constructed elaborate systems for making a woman like her believe she was lucky to receive whatever scraps of acknowledgement came her way. She thought about walking up a burned road with one suitcase. She thought about choosing to stay. "I love you too," she said. "I've known it since the kitchen table, when you said you wanted my inheritance kept in my name. I just wanted to earn the right to say it." He looked at her. "You'd already earned it." "I know that now," she said. He pulled her closer, and she let herself be pulled, and they stood there on the porch of everything they had built. Not the fairy tale version. Not the story where a woman was rescued, and a man redeemed, and everything resolved without cost. But the true version, the hard-won version, the one where two imperfect people had stood in the ruins of different kinds of fires and chosen to stay and keep building. The Cole Center opened in June. It opened on a Tuesday because Tuesdays were practical, and the work that mattered was always practical. Prescott was there. Mrs. Alcott was there with food enough for twice the people who came, which meant there was plenty, which was exactly how she liked it. The Boone family drove 60 miles again, and Elias Boone shook Nathan's hand, and Sarah Boone hugged Clara with the full-body conviction of a woman who meant it entirely. Rebecca was there, helping manage the door, doing the specific and practical work of atonement that she had decided on herself and that Clara had accepted without requiring. Tom Harlan stood near the new building, with the expression of a man looking at lumber he'd donated and seeing something considerably larger than lumber. The two nurses from Harper's Creek were there. Dr. Martha Raines and her partner Agnes Colt, who were not nurses at all, but trained medical practitioners who had accepted lesser titles because the world had limited what they were permitted to call themselves, and who ran their operations with a competence that silenced every doubt within the first week. Clara stood at the door of the building that bore her married name, and she shook hands, and she received people, and she answered questions with the steady directness that had always been her best quality, even when the world tried to convince her it was a liability. Nathan stood beside her, not in front of her, beside her. That was the thing she would remember most later. Not the opening, not the speeches, not even the look on Sarah Boone's face. The way Nathan Cole stood beside her at the door of the thing they had built shoulder to shoulder, equal in the way they had always been equal, and were now simply openly, without apology. The grand jury trials concluded in the fall. Greer pled guilty on 3 counts and cooperated extensively with the case against the Kansas City principals. The cooperation reduced his sentence, which Clara thought was appropriate, not because she felt charitable toward Greer, but because the cooperation caught bigger men doing greater damage, and the accounting needed to be complete. The Kansas City operation was unwound. Assets were identified, and in 2 cases partially restored to families who had lost them. It was not complete justice. Complete justice was a rarer thing than the law could reliably deliver. But it was real, documented, and lasting, and that was more than most people who had stood where Clara and Nathan stood had ever gotten. The Cole Center in its first year helped 47 families. It helped them with land filings and legal questions and medical referrals and the kind of patient practical guidance that came from people who understood what it was to face a complicated world without resources. It helped 3 families who had received claim documents similar to the one Greer had sent, because the pattern was now known and now nameable, and knowledge was the first defense against it. Clara ran it. Nathan ran the ranch. And in the evenings, in the house where the kitchen window faced east, they sat together and talked about what was next, what the center needed, what the land needed, what they needed, which was usually less than they thought, and mostly just each other, and the work, and the particular satisfaction of a life that was genuinely, verifiably, irrevocably theirs. On the morning of their first anniversary, Nathan was up before her. She came into the kitchen and found coffee already made, and him standing at the east window with a cup looking at the morning light coming in. The way it always did. long and pale in autumn, gold in summer, clear and sharp in the winter. She came and stood beside him, and he handed her the second cup without looking away from the window. They stood in the morning light together. "Same window," he said. "Same window," she agreed. He looked at her then. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for a year, the way he'd started looking at her somewhere between the south pasture and the courthouse, and the morning she'd told him she loved him on the porch, the way that meant she was the fixed point he oriented everything else from. "You know what I think about," he said, "when I look at this window?" "Margaret," she said. "And gold morning light. I think about that," he said. "And I think about a woman who walked up a burned road with a suitcase and refused to leave." He paused. "I think about how close I came to making her." "You couldn't have made me," Clara said. "No," he said. "I couldn't have." He said it like a fact and like a gift at the same time. "That's what I think about." She reached over and took his hand. The morning light moved across the floor between them. The same floor, the same house, the same land that had burned and been rebuilt, and had nearly been taken, and had been defended, and was theirs completely and irrevocably theirs. A burned homestead had become something neither of them could have built alone. A woman who had spent her life being told she was not enough had built something that 47 families called a lifeline. A scarred man who had believed he had nothing left to offer had learned that what he had to offer was everything that mattered. And the greatest fortune Clara Whitmore had ever carried. Not the inheritance, not the money that had rebuilt a ranch and funded a center and caught the men who preyed on the defenseless, was something that could not be deposited or documented or kept in any account that a lawyer in St. Louis could protect. It was this. This window. This man. This life built from burned ground, up by two people who chose each other when choosing was hard and kept choosing every single day. That was the only fortune that had ever been worth having, and she had earned every last bit of it.